The Plus-One Pact, a Sapphic rom-com about rivals, romance, and a fake fiancé in paradise. By Riley Fox. Copyright 2025 by Riley Fox. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise, without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events, or localities is entirely coincidental. Riley Fox asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book.
Chapter 1. RSVP. Real stress, very panicked. Jules stabbed at her salad, eyes flicking between her laptop screen and her phone. 12 minutes until her next client call, which meant 11 minutes to inhale lunch and 1 minute to fix her lipstick. She'd coordinated 3 product launches this week alone, and it was only Wednesday. Success tasted like store-bought kale and leftover anxiety. Incoming email from Savvy Lynn, her laptop chirped. Jules' fork paused halfway to her mouth. Savvy? They hadn't properly talked in months. Not since that awkward coffee meetup where Jules had dodged questions about her love life for 45 excruciating minutes. She clicked open the email, anticipating another "we should catch up" message that neither would follow through on. Jules, I know this is beyond last minute and probably unforgivable, but Danny and I would be absolutely heartbroken if you couldn't make it to our wedding. There was a mix-up with the digital invites, long story involving my mother and a misunderstanding about the cloud. And I just discovered you never received yours. What? Jules whispered, kale forgotten. It's happening in 2 weeks at Coral Haven Resort. I've attached all the details. We've reserved you a suite and I refuse to take no for an answer. It'll be just like college again. Everyone's coming. Please say yes. Love you tons. Savvy XOXO. Jules quickly opened the attachment, a PDF with elegant coral and cream borders. Her eyes widened. Cocktail reception, 4-day destination itinerary, couple of the weekend contest. This was no backyard wedding. This was a full-blown Instagram extravaganza at one of the most exclusive resorts in the Caribbean. She scrolled through the wedding party section, feeling a strange nostalgia seeing all the familiar names. Carmen, Mateo, Elle. Her heart stopped. Honor guest Rowan Price. There was a professional headshot alongside the title. Of course there was, and of course Rowan looked, Jules swallowed, unfairly gorgeous. Her auburn hair was shorter now, falling in perfect waves just below her chin. Her smile was understated but confident, those hazel eyes still somehow managing to look straight through the camera and directly into Jules' soul. Jules slammed her laptop closed. No, 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 she muttered, abandoning her salad to pace her home office. This cannot be happening. She glanced at her calendar, a perfectly color-coordinated grid of client meetings and project deadlines. 2 weeks from now was miraculously clear. She'd blocked it off months ago for a personal retreat that was supposed to involve spa treatments and sleep, not social anxiety and Rowan Price. Jules tugged at her charm bracelet, a nervous habit she'd never outgrown. Bullet point. Everyone will have partners, she said to herself, resuming her pacing. Bullet point. Everyone will ask why I'm alone, again. Sub-bullet. They'll use that sympathetic head tilt, you know the one. She stopped at her window, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. Bullet point. Rowan will think, I've completely failed at relationships while she's been out there. succeeding. At everything, always. Her phone buzzed. A text from Carmen. Did you get Savvy's panic invite? Please tell me you're coming. The resort has 5 pools. Jules groaned and flopped into her ergonomic desk chair. She couldn't say no. Savvy had been one of her closest friends in college, and it wasn't Savvy's fault that Jules had spent the last 5 years carefully curating her friend groups to ensure zero overlap with Rowan's social circle. She reopened her laptop and typed a quick, enthusiastic response to Savvy, confirming her attendance. Professional Jules. Composed Jules. Jules, who was absolutely fine with seeing her collegiate arch-nemesis for the first time since... Her fingers froze on the keyboard as a notification slid onto her screen. LinkedIn, of all the betrayals. Rowan Price has been featured in 30 Under 30 Marketing Visionaries for her groundbreaking work with nonprofit branding. Oh, come on, Jules whispered, clicking despite her better judgment. There was Rowan in a crisp linen blazer, looking effortlessly cool against an exposed brick background. The article gushed about her innovative approach to nonprofit marketing, her commitment to ethical branding, and her recent campaign that had increased donations to a women's shelter by 300%. Jules' mind flashed back to their final semester of college, the marketing competition they'd both entered, the all-nighters they'd pulled, fueled by caffeine and competitiveness, the way Rowan had looked at her when the results were announced, a tie infuriatingly, and said, "Guess we'll have to have a rematch someday, Everhart." Then there was the graduation party, the dark corner of someone's backyard, the way Rowan's eyes had dropped to her lips, just for a second, before someone interrupted them with champagne and congratulations. Jules had spent 5 years telling herself that Almost Kiss was just adrenaline and alcohol, that the fluttering in her stomach every time they'd argued was just competitive spirit. Her phone buzzed again, a group text this time. The wedding squad has been assembled, followed by a cascade of heart emojis. Jules watched in horror as name after name appeared in the chat, everybody from their old friend circle, including Rowan, whose gray bubble showed she'd read the messages but hadn't responded. "Can't wait to see everyone and meet all the partners," Talia wrote. "Jules, are you bringing anyone? Last I heard you were seeing some hotshot entrepreneur." That was Elle. Jules bit her lip. She'd mentioned a coffee date 6 months ago on Instagram, and Elle had apparently translated that into a relationship. The coffee date had gone nowhere, like every other attempt at romance in recent memory. Her fingers moved before her brain could intervene. "Actually, I'll be bringing my fiancé." The moment she hit send, Jules clapped her hand over her mouth. What had she done? The gray bubbles appeared immediately, everyone typing at once. "What? Jules, when did this happen? OMG, you're engaged. Pictures, we need pictures." She tossed her phone onto her desk like it had burned her. "No, no, no," she whispered, yanking open her desk drawer and frantically rearranging her already immaculate collection of highlighters by color. Pink, orange, yellow, green, blue, purple. Pink, orange, yellow. The phone rang. Carmen's face flashed on the screen. Jules answered with a grimace. "Hi." "Juliana Claire Everhart," Carmen's voice boomed through the speaker. "You did not get engaged without telling me. I am your oldest friend. I was there when you got your period in white shorts at summer camp. I'm not engaged," Jules blurted. Silence. "What?" Jules collapsed back into her chair, spinning in slow, miserable circles. "I'm not engaged. I lied. I panicked. I'm an awful person who tells awful lies." "Oh, honey," Carmen's voice softened. "What's going on? This isn't like you." Jules laughed bitterly. "Isn't it, though? Miss Perfect Image? Miss My Life is going according to plan?" "Jules, I can't show up alone now," she said, her voice cracking. "I physically cannot do it. Not with all these happy couples, not with Rowan there being all successful and probably dating some gorgeous genius who runs marathons and reads Proust in the original French." Carmen was quiet for a moment. "Rowan? This is about Rowan? No, Jules said too quickly, then groaned. Maybe. I don't know. We haven't spoken in 5 years, and now she's going to see me as this sad, lonely liar, and I just... Take a breath, Carmen instructed. You're spiraling. Jules inhaled deeply, recognizing the truth in Carmen's words. She stood up and grabbed a notepad from her desk, uncapping a sparkly purple pen. You're right, I need a plan. I'll find someone to bring as my fake fiancé. It's not what I was suggesting. But Jules was already writing, her event planner brain kicking into high gear. Let me think about who could pull this off convincingly. 30 minutes and one rescheduled client call later, Jules had created a detailed pro/con list for potential candidates. She'd crossed off 17 names already. Marisa can't because she's on that yoga retreat, she muttered, pacing in mismatched fuzzy socks, one pink with unicorns, one blue with clouds. Danny has that family thing. Alex would be perfect, but she's literally on another continent. Her phone pinged with a notification. She glanced down at Instagram. Rowan had posted for the first time in weeks a minimalist flat lay of a passport, sunglasses, and a book. The caption read, "Solo adventure to celebrate a friend's wedding. Coral Haven, ready or not." Jules froze mid-pace. Sola. Rowan was going solo. A dangerous, ridiculous, potentially catastrophic idea began to form in her mind. No, she said out loud, absolutely not. That would be insane. But the more she thought about it, the more it made a twisted kind of sense. Who better to pull off a fake engagement than someone who already knew her? Someone who understood the social dynamics of their friend group? Someone who, according to that post, also needed to save face at a couple's heavy wedding? Someone who, during their senior year theater elective, had played her girlfriend so convincingly that their professor had asked if they were actually dating. Jules pulled the cork from a bottle of Pinot Noir with more force than necessary and poured herself a generous glass. "This is either the worst or the best idea I've ever had," she told her empty apartment, taking a long sip. She paced some more, rehearsing what she might say. "Hey, Rowan, long time no speak. Funny story, I might have told everyone we're engaged." She grimaced. "No, terrible." She tried again. "Remember how we always competed at everything? Well, here's a new challenge. Let's pretend we're madly in love." She groaned. "Even worse." 3 outfit changes, half a bottle of wine, and 17 different opening lines later, Jules sat cross-legged on her couch. Rowan's contact pulled up on her phone. The same number she'd had in college, still saved under Ice Queen with a snowflake emoji. "Just do it," she whispered to herself, like ripping off a Band-Aid. She hit call before she could change her mind. 1 ring. "I've lost my mind," Jules muttered. 2 rings. She probably changed her number. This is a stranger who's about to... Jules. That voice. Lower than she remembered, a little huskier but unmistakably Rowan's. Jules nearly dropped the phone. "Rowan, hi, it's me, Jules, but you know that. You said my name, so obviously you know it's me." She winced. "Off to a great start." A pause. "It's been a while." 5 years, 2 months, and approximately 18 days, Jules said, then immediately wanted to die. "I mean, roughly. I didn't count or anything." Was that a soft laugh on the other end? "How have you been?" "Great, amazing, so good, just thriving, really." Jules closed her eyes, hating herself. "Actually, I'm calling because of Savvy's wedding," Rowan supplied. "Yes, the wedding, right. Are you going? I just got the invite, super last minute." "I'm going." "I am, yes." Another pause. "I saw you in the group chat earlier." Jules' stomach dropped. "About that." "Congratulations, by the way," Rowan said, a hint of something unidentifiable in her voice. "On your engagement." This was it, the moment to come clean, to admit was all a ridiculous lie, to hang up and move to another country and change her name. Instead, Jules took a deep breath and blurted, "I need you to be my fiancé." The silence that followed was so complete that Jules checked to see if the call had dropped. "Rowan, are you there?" "I'm trying to decide," Rowan said slowly, "if you're joking or if I've had some sort of auditory hallucination." Jules stood up, unable to sit still. "It's not a hallucination. I told everyone I was bringing my fiancée to the wedding because I panicked, and now they all want to meet her, but she doesn't exist, and I can't show up alone after that, and then I saw your post about going solo and I thought, maybe." She was rambling, the words tumbling out in a mortifying flood. "We could help each other out? Pretend to be engaged for the weekend. Everyone would be too shocked to ask questions, we both save face, and then we go back to our separate lives and never speak of it again." The silence stretched on, excruciating. Jules clutched her charm bracelet, rubbing her thumb over the tiny silver book that represented her college graduation. Finally, Rowan spoke. "You haven't changed at all, have you, Everhart?" Jules couldn't tell if that was an insult or a compliment. "Is that a no?" "It's a, I'm considering it." Hope flickered. "Really?" "On 2 conditions." "Name them." Jules was already reaching for her sparkly pen, ready to take notes. "First, I need help with a project. I'm rebranding a women's shelter and we need an event planner for the launch next month. Someone good. Someone who can work with tight nonprofit budgets." "Done," Jules said immediately. "What's the second condition?" "We need a convincing story," Rowan said, and Jules could almost hear the strategic wheels turning in that brilliant mind. No one's going to believe we went from college rivals to engaged without some serious explanation. We need details, consistency, all of it. Jules was already flipping to a fresh page in her notebook. "I'm way ahead of you. I'm thinking we reconnected at an industry conference last year. Drinks for old time's sake turned into dinner, turned into..." "A love story?" Rowan finished, her voice softer now. "Exactly." Another pause, and then, "Okay, Jules, I'm in." Jules exhaled, relief and terror mingling in her chest. "Really? Really? But we should meet before the wedding to get our story straight. Coffee? Tomorrow?" "Yes," Jules said, already mentally rearranging her schedule. "Yes, perfect." "Send me the details," Rowan said, and Jules could have sworn she heard a smile in her voice. "See you tomorrow, fiancé." The call ended, and Jules stared at her phone in disbelief. She looked down at her calendar, where she'd already color-coded the wedding weekend in bright pink. Now she'd need to add a coffee date with Rowan Price. The woman who'd always seen through her perfect facade. The woman who was about to become her fake fiancé. What could possibly go wrong?
Chapter 2. Terms and Conditions. Rowan stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen displaying Savvy Lynn's elegant wedding invitation. The pearlescent digital border glinted back at her, but it wasn't the flowery script or the beach-themed graphics that had her frozen. It was the bold text at the bottom that Jules had conveniently failed to mention during their bizarre call. Couple of the Weekend contest. The most romantic duo wins a free 3-night return stay at Coral Haven Resort and Spa. Activities include couples trivia, beach photo shoot, and our signature Prove Your Passion challenge. "Unbelievable," Rowan muttered, dropping the phone onto her sleek coffee table like it had personally offended her. She leaned back against her charcoal gray couch, the only sound in her minimalist apartment the quiet hum of the air purifier. Her heart was still racing from Jules's panicked proposal. The Jules Everhart queen of color-coded planners and ruthless ambition had sounded genuinely flustered, almost human. And what had Rowan done? Agreed to pretend to be her fiancé with barely a moment's hesitation. Engaged to Jules Everhart for a weekend. "Have I lost my mind?" she asked the empty room. Her apartment offered no answer, just clean lines and carefully curated neutrals. No clutter, no mess, no complications. Exactly how she preferred her life. And yet, she'd just invited chaos in with open arms. Rowan ran her fingers through her auburn hair. pushing it back from her face as she paced toward the window. Seattle's skyline glittered in the distance, reminding her of Mia. Beautiful, passionate, ultimately disappointed. Mia. "You're emotionally unavailable, Rowan," Mia had said during their final argument 3 months ago. "It's like you've built this perfect little fortress, and you're never going to let anyone inside. I'm not spending another year trying to scale those walls." The irony wasn't lost on Rowan. She'd been accused of being unable to commit, and now she was pretending to be engaged to the one person who'd always managed to get under her skin without even trying. She walked to her small home office and slid open the top drawer of her desk. Inside, perfectly arranged, lay her pen collection. With deliberate care, she selected the blue Mont Blanc, the one she used for important decisions, for contracts, for anything that required clear-headed precision. "This is just business," she reminded herself as she pulled out her leather-bound notebook. "A transaction." Flipping to a clean page, she wrote pros and cons the Jules engagement at the top in her neat, precise handwriting. It was ridiculous to even call it that, but seeing it written down somehow made it more manageable. Controllable. Under pros, she methodically listed. She tapped her pen against the paper, reluctant to acknowledge the sixth benefit that hovered in her mind: closure. After a moment's hesitation, she added it to the list. The cons column filled up much faster. She underlined the last item twice, then immediately scratched it out. There wouldn't be emotional complications because Rowan wouldn't allow them. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. The fact that Jules Everhart had once been the most infuriating, brilliant, captivating person in Rowan's orbit was irrelevant now. They were adults, professionals. This was a mutually beneficial arrangement. Still, memories surfaced unbidden. Jules in their advanced economic theory seminar, hand shooting up a millisecond before Rowan's. Jules at graduation, accepting the department's highest honor while Rowan clapped politely from the second-place position she'd grown too accustomed to occupying. Jules at the campus coffee shop, laptop open, surrounded by admirers, laughing with her whole body at something Rowan couldn't hear from her solitary table by the window. And then there was the debate, junior year, the legendary showdown that had somehow turned personal, with Jules accusing Rowan of cold intellectualism without heart, and Rowan retaliating by calling Jules a people-pleasing opportunist. They'd both stormed out, equal parts furious and exhilarated, the tension between them electric enough to power the entire campus. Rowan had avoided being alone with Jules after that. It felt safer that way. Now, years later, she was voluntarily walking into a tinderbox and bringing matches. For what? A business contact? A free hotel stay? Closure, her mind whispered again. A chance to finally put Jules Everhart firmly in your past. Rowan stood, abandoning her notebook and pacing the length of her apartment. The urge to call her sister Nadia was overwhelming. Nadia would tell her she was insane. Nadia would ask questions Rowan wasn't prepared to answer. Why would you ever agree to this? Because Jules had sounded panicked, and something in Rowan still responded to that. Why not just say, no? Because the alternative was letting Jules think she still had that power. Are you sure this isn't about something else? That was the question Rowan refused to examine too closely. The one that hinted at unfinished business, at what-ifs and almost moments, at the fact that despite their rivalry, or perhaps because of it, no one else had ever challenged Rowan quite like Jules had. No, calling Nadia was out of the question. This was a decision she'd made, and she would handle it with the same precision and control she applied to everything in her life. Rowan returned to the couch and picked up her phone again. She opened a blank text to Jules and began typing out her conditions, deleting and rewriting multiple times until the message was perfect. Jules, regarding our arrangement. 1. We split any prizes won at the resort, including the couple of the weekend package. 2. This remains strictly professional, no discussing our actual personal lives with other guests. 3. Boundaries for physical contact, hand-holding and brief touches acceptable, kissing only if absolutely necessary to maintain cover. 4. We develop our relationship story in advance and stick to it. 5. As discussed, you will provide 10 hours of consultation on the Horizon Foundation rebrand project. 6. This arrangement terminates immediately after the wedding weekend. If you agree to these terms, please respond with explicit confirmation. Rowan. Her thumb hovered over the send button as she realized she'd forgotten something critical. She quickly added, P.S. When were you planning to mention the couple of the weekend contest? Satisfied with the business-like tone, she hit send, then immediately set her phone face down on the coffee table. She wouldn't wait around for Jules's response like some anxious teenager. Instead, she walked to her kitchen, making herself a cup of peppermint tea with precise movements. The familiar ritual calmed her as she waited for the water to boil, measured out the loose leaves, and set the timer for exactly 4 minutes. The sharp, clean scent of peppermint filled the kitchen as she poured the tea into her favorite matte black mug. She added nothing to it, preferring the unfiltered taste. Her phone buzzed from the coffee table. Taking a deliberate breath, Rowan carried her tea over and checked the screen. Agreed to all terms, and I was going to mention the contest. Eventually, Jules, followed immediately by, Thank you for doing this. I know it's weird. I owe you one. Besides the consulting hours. Rowan could almost picture Jules sending these messages, probably pacing in her carefully decorated apartment, fretting over word choice. The image brought an unexpected smile to Rowan's face, before she caught herself. She typed back, You owe me nothing beyond our agreement. I'll send you a list of questions tomorrow so we can align our relationship story. Professional. Detached. Safe. Her curiosity getting the better of her, Rowan opened her laptop and navigated to the Coral Haven Resort website. The wedding package details were extensive, featuring professional photos of happy couples engaged in various resort activities. She clicked on the Special Events tab and found details of the weekend schedule. Friday welcome reception, love at first bite, cocktail hour. Saturday morning, lovebirds quiz on the beach terrace. Saturday afternoon, couples photo shoot, optional. Saturday evening, rehearsal dinner and prove your passion challenge. Sunday, wedding ceremony and reception. Rowan's stomach knotted as she read through the descriptions. The Lovebirds quiz promised to test how well couples knew each other, with questions about first dates, pet peeves, and favorite memories. The Prove Your Passion challenge was vaguely described as a fun opportunity for couples to showcase their connection through creative expression. It was a minefield of potential disasters. Her phone buzzed again with another text from Jules. I've created a shared document for our backstory. I thought 18 months of dating, engaged for 2 months, first met in college, true, reconnected at industry conference last year, plausible. Before Rowan could respond, another message arrived. Unless you have better ideas? You're good at this kind of strategic thinking. Was that a compliment? From Jules? Rowan shook her head, refusing to feel flattered. Your timeline works. I'll review the document tomorrow and add relevant details. She hesitated, then added, Have you seen the resort's couple activities schedule? We should prepare accordingly. The response came almost instantly. Already on it. I've created spreadsheets for the Lovebirds quiz prep and relationship milestone documentation. We'll share access. Of course you have, Rowan thought, simultaneously annoyed and oddly comforted by the predictability. Jules Everhart and her spreadsheets. Some things never changed. After sending a brief acknowledgement, Rowan added the wedding to her digital calendar, typing it in as Lynn Rosel's wedding with no hearts, no exclamation points, no color coding. Just a business appointment. Nothing more. She closed her laptop and carried her half-empty mug to the sink, rinsing it methodically before placing it in the dishwasher. The routine tasks grounded her, as her mind continued to process the bizarre turn her week had taken. As she prepared for bed, Rowan caught herself scrolling through Jules' Instagram. The perfectly curated feed showed a successful event planner with an enviable lifestyle. Elegant client parties, artfully arranged dessert tables, and the occasional polished selfie. But there was something missing from these images that Rowan remembered from college: the unguarded laugh, the passionate intensity, the occasional glimpses of vulnerability that made Jules more than just an overachieving perfectionist. Was that version of Jules still there, underneath the filtered photos and carefully composed captions? Or had she polished herself into someone entirely new? Not your concern, Rowan reminded herself, closing the app and setting her phone aside. This is just a job, a very strange, potentially catastrophic job. She went through her bedtime ritual with practiced efficiency. White noise machine on, peppermint oil diffuser activated, book opened to the exact page where she'd left off. But instead of reading, she found herself staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with all the ways this charade could go wrong. As she finally drifted toward sleep, Rowan's fingers absently traced the small tattoo on her inner forearm, the stack of books with a quill, inked into her skin the day she'd received the scholarship that had changed everything, the scholarship that had brought her to Westlake University, the scholarship that had put her in direct competition with Jules Everhart. Just a weekend, she told herself, just a business arrangement, nothing more. But, even as she fell asleep, a part of her wondered if this wedding would finally put their complicated history to rest, or if it would ignite something she'd spent years carefully, deliberately avoiding.
Chapter 3. The Hibiscus Suite. Jules clutched her laminated itinerary with white-knuckled fingers as she stood in the airport check-in line. Her carefully planned schedule was already in jeopardy thanks to a soul-crushing 5 a.m. alarm, an overzealous TSA agent who'd flagged her emergency wedding kit for suspicious contents, apparently mini sewing kits were potential weapons now, and the increasingly concerning absence of one Rowan Price. "You've got to be kidding me," she muttered, checking her phone for the 15th time in as many minutes. No new messages. Jules had triple confirmed their meeting time and spot, naturally, with calendar invites and reminder texts. She'd even sent a helpful airport map with their meeting location, circled in red and marked with a sparkling star emoji. And yet no Rowan. "Next, please." Jules wheeled her pristine cream-colored luggage to the counter, flashing her practiced customer service smile. "Good morning, Juliana Everhart, San Francisco to St. Lucia, with a connection in Miami." The agent clicked away at her keyboard. "Checking any bags today?" "Just this one." Jules patted her suitcase like a beloved pet. Inside, everything was arranged with military precision. 8 days of outfits, each in its own labeled packing cube, organized chronologically with accessory suggestions paper-clipped to each day's itinerary card. If Rowan had bothered to show up early as requested, she would have been impressed by the fiancé coordination section Jules had meticulously compiled. A mood board featuring screenshots from Rowan's Instagram showing her typical color palette: earth tones, burnt oranges, the occasional navy. Because that would be the dead giveaway, wouldn't it? 2 perfect couples always screamed fraud to the observant eye. "Your bag is checked through to your final destination. Boarding begins at gate 24 in 40 minutes. "Perfect, thank." "Sorry I'm late." A low, slightly breathless voice cut through Jules' carefully constructed calm. Traffic was a nightmare. Jules turned, her heart performing an unwelcome somersault. There stood Rowan Price, 5 years older than when Jules had last seen her, looking annoyingly composed despite her alleged traffic woes. Her auburn hair was shorter now, falling in soft waves just below her chin, instead of the long, straight cut she'd worn in college. She'd swapped her signature thick-framed glasses for thin wire ones that somehow made her hazel eyes more prominent. "She looks good," Jules thought traitorously. "Really good." "You're 27 minutes late," Jules said instead, because stating facts was safer than whatever feelings were bubbling up underneath. "I sent a very detailed—" "I know." Rowan held up her phone, displaying Jules' message with all its color-coded instructions. "I got caught behind an accident on the Bay Bridge. Some of us don't actually live in a perfect world where everything runs according to schedule. Some of us plan ahead for traffic, Jules wanted to say, but bit her tongue. They had 7 full days of pretending to be deliriously in love ahead of them. Starting with a fight wouldn't be strategic. Well, Jules adjusted the strap of her carry-on. You're here now. Do you need to check anything? Rowan patted the sleek, minimalist backpack slung over one shoulder. Carry-on only. For a week-long tropical wedding? Some of us know how to pack efficiently. Rowan's lips quirked up in a half-smile that Jules refused to find attractive. Not everyone needs 17 outfit options for each day. Jules felt her cheeks warm. I have exactly the right number of outfits, thank you, let's go. Security's going to be a nightmare. It wasn't until they were squeezed beside each other in economy seats, Jules' wedding budget didn't stretch to first class, despite her dreams, that the full weight of their situation settled on Jules' shoulders. Rowan smelled like sandalwood and some kind of vanilla, probably expensive, definitely distracting, and her arm kept brushing Jules every time she turned a page in her book. Jules pulled out her planner. So we should use this time to align on our relationship backstory. Rowan lowered her book with a sigh. I thought we covered this. We reconnected at a charity thing, dated for 6 months, and you proposed at sunset. Very romantic, very you. That's just the skeleton. Jules flipped to a tabbed section in her planner labeled Our Love Story in flawless calligraphy. We need details. What was the charity event? Who approached whom? What was our first date? First kiss? These are things real couples know. I don't think anyone's going to quiz us on. Savvy well, she's relentless. Jules tapped her pen against the paper. And Elle, they never forget a detail. If we slip up, they'll know something's off. Rowan studied her for a moment, then closed her book entirely. Fine. The charity was a literacy fundraiser for underprivileged kids. You approached me because you'd had too much champagne and liquid courage made you finally admit you'd always found me fascinating. I wouldn't say fascinating, Jules muttered. Our first date was coffee that turned into lunch that turned into dinner because we couldn't stop talking. You were surprised by how much I'd changed since college. Despite herself, Jules leaned in. How had you changed? Rowan's eyes caught hers, serious and steady. I'd stopped trying to prove myself to everyone and started figuring out what I actually wanted. She looked away, breaking the moment. First kiss was a week later, outside that Thai place on Valencia. You know, the one with the good curry? Jules blinked, startled by the specificity. You know Chiang Rai? I live in the Mission now. Their pet CU is life-changing. Jules jotted this down in her planner, steadfastly ignoring how easy it was to picture this fictional version of them, strolling down Valencia after dinner, stopping under the twinkling lights outside Chiang Rai, Rowan leaning down slightly, because of course she had to be 3 inches taller than Jules. What else? Rowan asked. Jules cleared her throat. Little things. Habits, preferences, allergies. Things a couple would know. You're allergic to shellfish, Rowan said instantly. Mild, but you avoid it to be safe. You hate reality TV but secretly watch the Great British Bake Off when you're stressed. You start every morning with coffee, black with 1 sugar, and you talk to yourself when you're working through a problem. Jules stared. How did you... College, Rowan shrugged. We lived on the same floor sophomore year, remember? Some things were impossible not to notice. Jules didn't know whether to be flattered or unnerved that Rowan had been paying such close attention. Well, you're a morning person now, apparently. You drink tea instead of coffee. You listen to podcasts at an inconsiderate volume. I've never listened to a podcast in my life. Well, now you do, and we argue about it. Jules scribbled this down. See? Authentic relationship details. Rowan's mouth twitched. We should have at least one recurring argument. All couples do. Besides your podcast volume? Something meaningful. Maybe I think you work too much. Maybe you think I don't take things seriously enough. Jules bit her lip. That's actually good. You're constantly telling me to relax and not micromanage everything, and I wish I'd occasionally color code a spreadsheet or two. They looked at each other, the ghost of old arguments and new fiction blurring uncomfortably. "Ladies and gentlemen," the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, "we're beginning our final descent into St. Lucia International Airport." The taxi ride from the airport to Coral Haven Resort wound along coastal roads that should have been breathtaking. Jules, however, couldn't focus on the crystal blue water or the lush, tropical landscape. She was too busy trying to drill their new relationship timeline into Rowan's head. "If anyone asks, I proposed on New Year's Eve at Dolores Park. You were completely surprised." "Because I never thought you'd be brave enough to go first," Rowan interjected, gazing out the window. "Which makes sense, given how you've always played it safe." Jules paused her recitation. "I don't play it safe." "You absolutely do. Remember when everyone went cliff jumping in Tahoe and you stayed behind to organize the picnic?" "I had food poisoning." "You had cold feet." Rowan turned to her, golden flecks dancing in her hazel eyes. "Which is why it would genuinely shock me if you proposed first." The taxi driver caught Jules' eye in the rearview mirror and smiled knowingly. "You two been together long?" Without missing a beat, Rowan reached over and laced her fingers with Jules. 6 months officially, but we've known each other forever, haven't we, honey?" Jules nearly choked on the casual endearment. Rowan's hand was warm and strong, her thumb absently stroking Jules' palm in a way that felt so natural it was terrifying. "Forever and a day," Jules managed, her voice only slightly strained. The driver nodded sagely. "That's the best kind. When you already know all the ugly parts and love each other anyway." Jules stiffened, but Rowan just laughed, a genuine, warm sound that Jules hadn't heard in years. "Exactly," Rowan agreed, squeezing Jules' hand before releasing it. "All the ugly parts, and then some." Coral Haven Resort was even more stunning than the website had promised. Pastel pink and blue buildings with white trim lined perfectly manicured paths, palm trees swayed in the gentle breeze, and the air smelled like plumeria and saltwater. As they approached the open-air lobby, Rowan leaned close to Jules' ear. "Game faces on, I suppose?" Jules nodded and took a deep breath. Then, with a confidence she absolutely did not feel, she reached for Rowan's hand again. This time she was prepared for the contact, for the way Rowan's fingers fit between hers. What she wasn't prepared for was how right it felt. "Welcome to Coral Haven," the receptionist behind the counter beamed as they approached. Her name tag read Amara. "Checking in?" "Yes, under Everhart and Price," Jules said, sliding her ID across the counter. "We're here for the Lynn Roselle's wedding." Amara's eyes lit up as she typed. "Oh, you're our engaged couple. Congratulations." Jules felt her face warm. "Thank you. You two make such a gorgeous couple. We've got you in our hibiscus suite, one of our premium honeymoon accommodations. The Lynn party specifically requested it for you." "That's very thoughtful," Jules managed, already imagining the over-the-top romantic decor she'd seen on the website. "Absolutely, and as part of our wedding guest package, you'll receive complimentary welcome champagne, a couple's massage voucher, and entry into our Couple of the Weekend contest." Amara handed them 2 key cards and a glossy brochure. "First event is tonight's welcome dinner in the Seaside Pavilion, 7 o'clock sharp." They both nodded, still holding hands, as a bellhop appeared to take Jules' suitcase. "Follow me to the hibiscus suite." The young man led them along a winding path lined with tropical flowers, chattering enthusiastically about the resort's amenities. "The private beach is just down those steps, and the infinity pool has a swim-up bar that's open until midnight. Fantastic piña coladas." Jules nodded politely, all too aware of Rowan's stiff posture beside her. They hadn't dropped the hand-holding. If anything, Jules found herself gripping tighter, as if Rowan might bolt at any moment. "And here we are." The bellhop stopped in front of a pink bungalow with white shutters and a red, hibiscus-lined pathway. The most romantic suite in the resort, if you ask me. He swung the door open with a flourish, and Jules immediately understood his enthusiasm. The hibiscus suite was a romance novel fantasy brought to life. Gauzy white curtains billowed around a massive four-poster bed covered in crimson rose petals arranged in a heart shape. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket beside a platter of chocolate-covered strawberries. Through an archway she glimpsed the infamous heart-shaped hot tub, surrounded by strategically placed mirrors. The tub has 16 different jet settings, the bellhop informed them with a wink, setting Jules' suitcase beside an ornate armoire. And the bed is our Cloud 9 model, most comfortable mattress in the Caribbean. It's certainly atmospheric, Rowan said, her voice carefully neutral. Oh, and these are for you. He produced 2 plush bathrobes from the armoire, holding them up proudly. One was embroidered with his, the other with hers. Jules and Rowan stared at the robes, then at each other. A beat of silence passed before Rowan's lips twitched. Jules felt her own composure crack. I suppose heteronormativity follows us even to paradise, Rowan said dryly, and Jules couldn't help it. She burst out laughing. A real, snorting laugh that had the bellhop looking between them in confusion. Sorry, Jules gasped, trying to collect herself. It's just, we're both hers. Oh, understanding dawned on the young man's face. My apologies. I'll have housekeeping bring 2 hers robes immediately. No need, Rowan said, still smiling slightly. I'll happily be his for the week. Makes me the man of the relationship, right, Jules? Jules rolled her eyes but couldn't stop grinning. In your dreams, Price. The bellhop, clearly relieved they weren't offended, backed toward the door. Well, enjoy your stay. Let us know if you need anything. The moment he left, closing the door behind him, the spell broke. Jules and Rowan let go of each other's hands simultaneously, and the room suddenly felt both too small and too quiet. They both stared at the bed, the one very obvious rose petal-covered bed. So, Jules broke the silence, aiming for casual and landing somewhere near strained, sleeping arrangements. Rowan crossed her arms. I can take the chaise lounge. It looks, almost long enough. Don't be ridiculous, your legs won't fit. Jules gestured awkwardly. I'll take the chaise, you take the bed. We could share, Rowan suggested, then hastily added, with a pillow barrier. It's a king size. We'd barely know the other was there. Jules tried not to picture it, lying beside Rowan, separated only by a flimsy line of pillows, listening to her breathe in the dark. That's practical, she said finally. We can try that. An awkward silence stretched between them until a sharp knock at the door made them both jump. Housekeeping, a cheerful voice called.
Chapter 4. History Repeats. Rowan couldn't take another minute of Jules' performance, the way she kept touching Rowan's arm, leaning in too close, laughing too loudly at every comment. It was exhausting. The welcome dinner had barely reached the appetizer course when Rowan pushed her chair back with a decisive scrape. Sorry everyone, jet lag's hitting me harder than expected, she announced to the table of semi-familiar faces, avoiding Jules' startled gaze. I think I need to turn in early. Jules half rose. Do you want me to? No, stay. Rowan softened her tone with practiced effort. Enjoy catching up. I just need some quiet. She squeezed Jules' shoulder as she passed, a calculated gesture for their audience. But the brief contact sent an unwelcome shiver down her spine. The past 6 hours of performing coupledom had her nerves frayed to breaking point. Instead of heading to their shared suite with its mockingly romantic rose petals, Rowan followed the winding path to the mango tree bar. The massive tree dominated the outdoor lounge, its sprawling branches draped with fairy lights that cast everything in a warm, intimate glow. Perfect for romance, terrible for her mood. The bartender, a woman with an impressive collection of colorful arm tattoos, raised an eyebrow in greeting. What can I get you? Gin and tonic. No lime. Extra botanical garnish if you have it. Juniper and rosemary work? Perfect. Rowan slid onto a stool at the corner of the bar, positioning herself to observe the rest of the space. Already the other wedding guests were coupling up, arms draped over shoulders, heads bent close in conversation. She pulled out her phone to give herself something to focus on besides the painful irony of her situation, surrounded by genuine romance while faking her own. Her drink arrived, a sprig of rosemary and juniper berries floating elegantly on top. She took a grateful sip, letting the botanical notes linger on her tongue. "Mum," the bartender was back. "This is from the gentleman at the end of the bar." She slid over a tumbler of amber liquid that Rowan hadn't ordered. Looking up, Rowan spotted a familiar face grinning in her direction. Danny Reed, their old college debate team captain, now sporting a trimmed beard and the confident posture of adulthood. He abandoned his seat and ambled over, drink in hand. "So, the Ice Queen finally melted for overachiever Barbie, huh?" Danny Reed. Rowan couldn't help smiling despite the nickname. "Still using outdated college labels, I see. Some things stick." He clinked his glass against hers. "Would have bet money you two would end up hating each other forever, not planning a wedding." "Well, life's full of surprises." "No kidding. When Savvy told me, I nearly fell off my chair." His eyes crinkled with genuine warmth. "Congrats, though. For what it's worth, I think you balance each other out." Rowan took another sip of her drink to avoid responding. Danny had always been dangerously observant. "Rowan Price." A new voice called from across the bar. "Holy shit, it really is you!" Mateo Rosales appeared, looking essentially unchanged from college except for a more expensive haircut. He threw his arms around her in an enthusiastic hug before she could protest. The prodigal debate champion returns. And engaged to Jules Everhart? The apocalypse must be nigh. Before Rowan could formulate a response that wouldn't sound obviously fake, another figure joined their growing circle. "I want in on this reunion," said a smooth, familiar voice. Rowan turned to find Talia Bloom standing there, looking exactly as polished and composed as she had in college. Talia, Jules's ex from senior year. Wonderful. "Talia?" Rowan managed, grateful when the bartender took that moment to ask the newcomers for their drink orders. Within minutes, Rowan found herself surrounded by a circle of college acquaintances, all buzzing with questions about her relationship with Jules. Mateo had pulled over extra chairs, trapping her in what was quickly becoming an impromptu trip down memory lane. "Remember when you two nearly came to blows over the last study table in the library's quiet section?" Danny chuckled. "Jules had her color-coded note cards spread out everywhere." "And Rowan just sat down anyway," Mateo finished, right in the middle of Jules' constitutional law notes. "It was the only table with a working outlet," Rowan defended, the memory surprisingly clear. "And she was hogging the entire space." "You could have asked nicely," Talia pointed out with a knowing smile. "That wasn't really their style," Danny said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Remember when they both applied for the Clayton Research Fellowship? The department had to create a second position because they couldn't decide between them." Mateo leaned in. "Or the time Jules accidentally spilled coffee on Rowan's white shirt before her law school interview?" "That was genuinely an accident," Rowan corrected, remembering Jules' horrified expression and the frantic way she'd tried to help clean up. "She lent me her backup blouse." "Which was pink, with little bows," Danny added, snorting. "And you wore it anyway." "I had 15 minutes before my interview, not much choice." "You two were always neck and neck," Talia observed, swirling her martini. "It was exhausting just watching you." Mateo nodded vigorously. "The bibliography battle of senior year? Legendary." "The what now?" Danny asked. "Oh, you missed it. They were partnered on a project in advanced political theory, and they got into this massive argument over citation format. Jules wanted MLA, Rowan insisted on Chicago. Professor Khanna found them in the library at 3 a.m., surrounded by style guides, practically screaming about footnotes. Rowan felt her cheeks warm. "We were under a lot of pressure. We always had a betting pool on when you two would hook up," Talia said, leaning in conspiratorially. The tension was ridiculous. Every time you argued, it was like watching foreplay. Rowan choked on her drink, the gin burning down the wrong pipe as she coughed. Danny patted her back sympathetically. "You okay there, champ?" he asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Fine," she wheezed. "Just surprised by the analogy." Talia shrugged. "I'm just being honest. Even when I was dating Jules, I knew there was something there between you two." She lifted her martini in a toast. "No hard feelings, by the way. I'm happy for you both." The conversation had veered into dangerously truthful territory. Rowan needed an exit strategy. "Oh," Danny exclaimed suddenly, pulling out his phone. "I've still got photos from that debate tournament in Boston. Remember? Junior year?" "You have photos from 7 years ago on your phone?" Rowan asked skeptically. "Cloud storage, Price. Get with the times." He swiped through his gallery. "Here we go. The Harvard Invitational." He turned his phone toward the group. There they all were, impossibly young in their formal debate attire. Rowan recognized herself in a crisp navy suit, hair pinned severely back, looking much too serious for 22. Danny swiped again. "This one's my favorite." The image showed the team's prep room. Jules standing at a whiteboard in a pencil skirt and blazer, mid-gesture as she practiced her closing statement. In the background, slightly blurred but unmistakable, was Rowan. Not looking at her notes or her laptop, but watching Jules with an expression that made present-day Rowan's stomach drop. There was nothing competitive in that look, nothing that suggested rivalry or frustration or annoyance. It was pure admiration, maybe even longing, captured in a moment when Rowan thought no one was watching. "I should, probably head back," Rowan said abruptly, standing so quickly she bumped the table. "Early breakfast meeting with the wedding planner tomorrow." "But we're just getting to the good stories," Mateo protested. "Rain check," she promised, already calculating the fastest route out. "Thanks for the drink, Danny." She escaped before anyone could stop her, the night air cool against her flushed face. Instead of returning to the suite, she wandered down a path that curved around the property, away from the lights and laughter. She needed to reset, to regain the professional distance that had always protected her. Almost unconsciously, Rowan's fingers found the small stack of books tattooed on her inner forearm. Her first and only tattoo, a reminder of how far she'd come from the scholarship kid always fighting to prove herself. She traced the outline, a habit that calmed her when her thoughts spiraled. Had there always been something more with Jules? Had her competitive drive been masking attraction? No, that was too simplistic. Their rivalry had been real. The frustration, the clash of personalities. The way Jules could make her blood boil with a single dismissive comment. But that photo, the way she'd been looking at Jules when she thought no one could see, suggested something far more complicated. Rowan's wandering led her into the main resort building. The lobby was quiet now, most guests at dinner or the bar. As she passed the small event space, she spotted a familiar figure surrounded by piles of gift bags and ribbons. Savvy looked up and beamed. "Rowan! Perfect timing! I could use an extra pair of hands." "I'm happy to help," Rowan offered, relieved for the distraction. "What are you working on?" "Welcome bags for everyone. Danny was supposed to help, but he disappeared to the bar." Savvy gestured to the chaos around her. "I'm trying to personalize each one with a little memento." The table was covered with trinkets, photos, and small gifts. In the center sat a thick, well-worn scrapbook labeled "Undergrad Days" in Savvy's looping handwriting. "Could you stuff these bags while I run to grab more tissue paper? I forgot it in the suite." "Of course." "Back in 5, Savvy called, already hurrying toward the elevators. Alone with the disorganized piles, Rowan's eyes kept drifting to the scrapbook. Several photos had spilled out, colorful corners peeking from between the pages. Just a quick look wouldn't hurt. She flipped it open to a random page and froze. There were she and Jules, backs stiff, heads high, accepting debate trophies while standing pointedly at opposite ends of their team. Savvy had added a neatly printed caption. The Jules and Rowan Show, Episode 23. Can they share a victory? Spoiler, no. Rowan turned the page. More photos of her and Jules, in the dining hall, arguing over textbooks. At a Halloween party, both accidentally dressed as Ruth Bader Ginsburg. In the library, surrounded by stacks of competing research. Each image had been lovingly documented with dates, context, and commentary. One page was flagged with a bright pink post-it note labeled, "Sexual Tension Alert." It showed them at graduation, caught in what appeared to be a heated exchange, standing too close, fingers nearly touching as they both held the same program. Rowan remembered that moment differently. She'd been congratulating Jules on her summa cum laude distinction, and Jules had stiffly thanked her before walking away. There hadn't been tension. Had there? She kept turning pages, increasingly unsettled by how thoroughly their rivalry had been chronicled by their friends. Then, one photo stopped her cold. Junior year. The empty debate prep room. Late at night before the Harvard tournament. Jules stood inches from Rowan, her hand on Rowan's collar, fixing her tie. Their faces were so close, eyes locked in an intense gaze that transcended any simple rivalry. The moment crashed back with sensory clarity. Jules' vanilla perfume hanging in the air between them, the sound of rain tapping against the windows, the thundering of Rowan's heart drowning out rational thought. Jules' fingers had lingered at her collar, smoothing the silk tie repeatedly, though it had long been straightened. Neither of them had spoken. Rowan had leaned forward, just slightly, and Jules' breath had caught. Then the door had swung open, their teammates pouring in with coffee and enthusiasm, and the moment had shattered. They'd never acknowledged it, never spoke of how close they'd come to crossing a line. Yet here was photographic evidence. Someone else had seen and documented that charged moment, not just seen it, but recognized it for what it was. The sound of heels clicking on marble jolted Rowan back to reality. She quickly closed the scrapbook and stood, arranging her features into a neutral expression as Savvy returned, arms full of tissue paper. "Find anything interesting?" Savvy asked, her tone suspiciously innocent. "Just admiring your scrapbooking skills," Rowan replied evenly. "Very thorough." "I've always been a documentarian at heart." Savvy tilted her head. "Jules was my roommate, but you were always part of our story too, Rowan, even when you two were trying to destroy each other. We weren't that dramatic." "Oh, please. The two brightest stars in our class, always orbiting each other. It was epic." Savvy handed her a stack of tissue paper, though, I have to admit, I didn't see the romance coming until senior year. "What made you think?" "The way you looked at each other when you thought no one was watching." Savvy's smile was knowing. "So different from how you acted in public." Rowan focused on carefully folding tissue paper into a gift bag. People change, rivalries fade. And sometimes what looks like hate is just another form of passion. Rowan couldn't argue with that, not with the evidence of that photograph still burning in her mind. Not with 6 more days of pretending to be in love with Jules ahead of her, a performance that now felt dangerously close to excavating buried truths. "These bags won't stuff themselves," Rowan said finally, reaching for another handful of tissue paper. "Tell me where everything goes." As she mechanically assembled welcome bags, Rowan's mind remained fixed on that photograph and the memory it captured, on the moment she'd almost kissed Jules Everhart 7 years before agreeing to be her fake fiancé, on the uncomfortable possibility that there had always been more than rivalry between them, a truth too complicated to acknowledge with their precarious charade just beginning.
Chapter 5. Operation. Couples Trivia. Jules paced the length of the bathroom, phone in one hand and a packet of multicolored sticky notes in the other. She'd been in here for 32 minutes. Not that she was counting. Pretending to take a leisurely post-flight shower while actually conducting intensive Rowan research. The shower had run for exactly 18 minutes to maintain the illusion while she scrolled frantically through Instagram, Twitter, and even LinkedIn. "Sage green, not forest green," she muttered, scribbling on a lime-colored sticky note. Coffee, black but secretly adds cinnamon when nobody's looking. Allergic to strawberries but will eat them anyway for good desserts. God, I'm pathetic. She stuck the notes inside her planner, organizing them by category: favorites, history, habits, and because she couldn't help herself. Dislikes, a category largely populated with things like Jules' color-coded email system and people who talk during movies. A text from Carmen lit up her screen. How's playing house with your arch nemesis? Jules typed back, fine, totally fine, borderline professional. Carmen responded with a skeptical emoji and a photo Jules hadn't seen before. Rowan in a tailored jumpsuit at some gallery opening, looking unfairly gorgeous. Are we still pretending you weren't obsessed with her in college? I wasn't obsessed, I was competitive, there's a difference. Sure, Jan. Carmen added a gif of someone rolling their eyes dramatically. A knock at the bathroom door made Jules fumble her phone. You planning to stay in there all afternoon? Rowan called through the door. Or are you drowning in hairspray? Because the trivia thing starts in 45 minutes. Jules flushed the empty toilet for effect, tucking the sticky notes into her planner. Just freshening up. For an hour. What are you doing in there, taking the SATs? Jules yanked open the door, determined to look casual despite the stack of notes sticking out from her planner. Some of us care about making good impressions. Rowan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed over her chest. Her hair was damp, curling slightly around her face from her own shower. She wore a simple ivory button-down with sleeves rolled to the elbows and slim black pants. It was infuriatingly effortless. If by good impression you mean most likely to color code a funeral, then mission accomplished. Rowan eyed the planner. What's all that? Research. On what? The complete history of bathroom fixtures? On you, Jules said, lifting her chin. If we're going to pull this off, we need to know details about each other, like, my coffee order. Triple shot oat milk latte, 1 pump vanilla extra hot but not scalding, in a 4-here mug unless you're feeling antisocial, which is at least 3 days a week. Jules blinked. How did you... You ordered the same thing every day for 2 years straight during advanced statistics. You'd waltz in exactly 4 minutes before class, loudly sip it to annoy Professor Harding, then dominate the discussion while I plotted your academic demise. Rowan's mouth quirked. I pay attention. Heat flooded Jules' cheeks. Well, so do I. Prove it. Black coffee, but you add cinnamon when nobody's looking, Jules ticked off on her fingers. You were allergic to strawberries in college, but ate them anyway if the dessert looked good enough. Your favorite color is sage green, not forest green, and you correct anyone who gets it wrong. You sleep with white noise on, and you have exactly 1 stuffed animal hidden somewhere because you can't sleep in strange places without it. Rowan's eyes widened fractionally. Jules felt a small thrill of victory, which died as Rowan crossed to the bed and unzipped her suitcase, pulling out a worn, definitely not sage green stuffed owl. Who told you about Edward? Jules froze. I didn't know his name. It was a lucky guess. No, it wasn't. Fine. I saw you with him once during that overnight debate tournament in Pittsburgh. You were half asleep in the hotel lobby, waiting for coffee, and he was peeking out of your bag. Rowan looked at her for a long moment. You know an uncomfortable amount of details about me. Likewise. Jules snapped her planner shut. Let's go crush this trivia thing. Jules faltered as they entered the Flamingo Terrace. The space looked like it had been decorated by a committee of well-intentioned 5-year-olds with an unlimited budget and an obsession with Florida kitsch. Life-sized gold flamingo statues stood sentry at each end of the buffet. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed the ceiling, reflecting off the birds' shiny surfaces. Each table featured centerpieces of real tropical flowers, surrounded by tiny plastic pink flamingos wearing miniature wedding veils. Subtle, Rowan whispered close to Jules' ear. Did you plan this? Jules bit back an unexpected smile. Sadly, this masterpiece is not my work. I thought everything this weekend had your fingerprints all over it. This has real Everhart party planner energy. Tasteful, but with exactly one element pushed to the absolute limit. I'll take that as a compliment. You would, Rowan said, but there was no real bite to it. Mateo bounded onto the small stage at the front of the terrace, wearing a flamingo print blazer that somehow managed to be both hideous and completely charming. He tapped the microphone, sending feedback through the room. Welcome, welcome, my gorgeous couples. Tonight begins our epic Couple of the Weekend competition, and I hope you're all ready for some romantic revelations. He winked at the crowd. This round is, how well do you know your partner? Simple concept, diabolical execution. Servers distributed scorecards and pens to each table as Mateo explained the rules. Each of you will write your own answer to the question, then guess what your partner wrote. 1 point if you match, 0 if you don't. Questions get progressively more revealing as we go. He waggled his eyebrows. Winning couple gets first pick of tomorrow's activities plus a 100-point bonus toward the weekend championship. Jules straightened in her chair. We've got this. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Competitive much? You're one to talk. I still remember the victory speech you prepared for when your stats group project got the highest grade. I was 18, and I didn't actually deliver it. Only because I intercepted the note cards. You did what? First question, Mateo announced. Easy to start? What's your partner's favorite color? Write your answer, then your guess of their answer. Jules scribbled lavender as her favorite, then hesitated before writing sage green, not forest green, as her guess for Rowan. She peeked at Rowan's paper, but the woman had angled her body to block Jules' view. No cheating, Everhart. I would never, Jules lied, then went back to her paper. Mateo collected the first round answers, shuffling through them with theatrical gasps. Okay, let's see how our couples did. Savvy and Danny, both correct. Ella and Jaden, both correct. Jules and Rowan. Jules held her breath. Both correct. Jules said lavender and Rowan guessed lavender. Rowan said sage green, specifically not forest green, her words, not mine, and Jules answered the same. A small burst of triumph bloomed in Jules' chest. She caught Rowan's eye across the table, and for a second, something almost playful passed between them. Lucky guess, Rowan murmured. Next question. What's your partner's coffee order? Jules wrote quickly, triple shot oat milk latte, 1 pump vanilla, extra hot but not scalding, then guessed for Rowan, black coffee with secret cinnamon. When Mateo read the results, they'd both nailed it, again. Our next question. What was your partner's childhood pet, if any? Jules froze. She didn't know this one. She racked her brain trying to remember any mention of pets from their college days. Nothing. She took a wild guess. Golden retriever named Max? Rowan glanced up, catching Jules in her moment of panic. Something flickered in her expression. Amusement, maybe? Before she returned to writing. Jules and Rowan, Mateo announced. Rowan, you said no pets, strict apartment policy, but Jules had a beta fish named Research that died during finals week junior year, and Jules guessed, golden retriever named Max? He sucked air through his teeth. No match. Jules, Rowan never had childhood pets. False, Rowan said suddenly, raising her hand. I never had dogs or cats. But there was a building turtle in the courtyard of my apartment complex. His name was Mortimer, and I was his designated lettuce provider for 6 years. Jules stared at her. Why hadn't Rowan written that? Why essentially give a wrong answer when Jules was bound to miss it? Mateo shrugged. Sorry, no points awarded retroactively, but I love the turtle backstory. As the game continued, Jules found herself increasingly unsettled by how many answers she and Rowan got right. Favorite music, Jules correctly wrote 90s R&B and pretentious indie rock for Rowan. Biggest pet peeve, Rowan accurately listed people who stand on the left side of escalators for Jules. They were running a close second to Savvy and Danny as the evening progressed. "Bathroom break," Mateo announced after the 6th round. "Refresh those drinks, stretch those legs, and prepare for the relationship history round." Jules practically bolted for the ladies' room, needing a moment to recalibrate. She was splashing water on her face when Savvy burst through the door. "Jules," she squealed, pulling her into a fierce hug. "I can't believe how perfect you two are together. How did we not see it back in college?" Jules stiffened, guilt flooding her system. "Oh, you know, we were also focused on academics." "But the way she looks at you," Savvy sighed dreamily, "and the way you finish each other's sentences. Danny and I have a betting pool going on whether you'll get married before or after us." Jules forced a smile. "Well, we're taking it slow, one wedding at a time." "Maybe not so slow," Savvy teased. "I've never seen you look at anyone the way you look at her." She squeezed Jules' hands. "I'm just so happy for you both." The knot in Jules's stomach tightened. "Thanks, Savvy, that means a lot." By the time Jules returned to the table, Mateo was already introducing the next round, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Now we get personal. Relationship history round." He paused dramatically. "Question: what was your partner's last serious relationship like, and why did it end? Be honest, your partner will know if you're not." Jules felt the blood drain from her face. She had no idea who Rowan's last girlfriend was, let alone why they'd broken up. She watched as Rowan tensed across the table but wrote something down anyway. Jules hesitated, then wrote the vaguest answer possible: work differences, mutual decision. For her guess at Rowan's answer, she took another wild stab. Long distance didn't work out. When Mateo reached their table, his eyebrows shot up. "Interesting." He shuffled their cards. Jules said, "Her last relationship ended due to work differences, mutual decision." Rowan, you guessed. Talia moved to Chicago, long-distance failure. A murmur rippled through the room. Jules felt heat creep up her neck as Rowan's gaze snapped to hers. "And Rowan," Mateo continued, "you wrote that your last relationship ended because she wanted me to quit my job and follow her to Seattle." Jules guessed long distance didn't work out. He made a buzzer sound. "Not specific enough. No points." An uncomfortable silence fell over their table. Other couples exchanged knowing looks. Jules stared at her empty drink, mortification washing over her. How had she failed so spectacularly? And how did Rowan know exactly what had happened with Talia? "We don't really talk about exes," Rowan said smoothly, her voice carrying just enough to reach nearby tables. "They're in the past for a reason." Jules couldn't look at her. Beneath her embarrassment lurked something else, a strange sense of being wounded. Rowan knew her history while remaining a complete mystery. After all her research and flashcards, Jules realized she knew Rowan's coffee order, but nothing about her heart. They rallied through the final rounds, clawing their way back to second place behind Savvy and Danny. Mateo presented them with a gift certificate for a couple's sunset sale, which Jules accepted with forced enthusiasm, avoiding Rowan's gaze. As they made their way back to their suite, accepting congratulations from wedding guests, Jules maintained a rigid smile. Inside, she was unraveling. This was her plan, her charade, and somehow she was the one being exposed. In their room, Jules retreated to the bathroom, claiming she needed to remove her makeup. Instead, she sat on the closed toilet lid, staring at her phone as a notification lit up the screen. It was from Carmen, a screenshot from Savi's Instagram story showing Jules and Rowan at their trivia table, Jules laughing at something Rowan had said, Rowan looking at her with an expression Jules couldn't quite decipher. The caption read, "Do you even know how fake this still is? Because from here it looks complicated," followed by flame emojis. Jules studied the photo. She didn't remember that moment. Didn't remember laughing like that, completely unguarded. And she certainly didn't recognize the way Rowan was looking at her, a mixture of something like fondness and exasperation. She stared at her reflection in the mirror and took a deep breath. "This is your plan, your charade," she whispered fiercely. "Get it to..." When she finally emerged, Rowan was arranging blankets on the bed, creating a neat barrier down the center. "Building a wall?" Jules asked, aiming for lightness. "Border security," Rowan replied, not looking up. "You kick in your sleep." "How would you know that?" "Pittsburgh, debate tournament. You fell asleep on the bus ride back and used me as a pillow. I have the bruises to prove it." There it was again, another detail from their past that Rowan remembered in vivid detail. "We need more convincing details," Jules said suddenly, pulling out her planner and a fresh pack of color-coded sticky notes. "I think everyone saw right through us tonight." "You think?" Rowan's voice dripped sarcasm. "Maybe it was when you had no idea who I'd dated last." "Which is exactly my point. We need to study each other better." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "Study?" "Get to know each other," Jules amended. "For real this time, not just our coffee orders or favorite colors." "Fine," Rowan said, crossing her arms. "But no flashcards this time, Everhart." Jules felt a flutter in her stomach. Relief, she told herself. Just relief that their cover wasn't completely blown. "Deal."
Chapter 6, 20 Questions. The rain started as a gentle patter against the balcony doors, barely noticeable as Rowan scrolled through her emails. Just background noise, until that first distant rumble of thunder made her look up from her laptop. "Did you hear that?" Jules asked from across the suite where she'd been arranging and rearranging her toiletry bag by color. "It's a tropical island in hurricane season," Rowan said, not bothering to look up. "Rain happens." But the storm wasn't content with being dismissed. Within minutes, the sky darkened dramatically, transforming afternoon into premature dusk. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Wind howled through the palm trees, bending them at alarming angles. "That's a lot more than just rain," Jules said, moving toward the balcony doors with a mix of wonder and concern. Rowan was about to deliver a sarcastic comment about Jules' talent for stating the obvious when the lights flickered once, twice, and then surrendered completely to darkness. "Perfect," Rowan muttered. The soft glow of emergency lighting activated moments later, casting the room in a dim, slightly eerie illumination. Just enough to see outlines and avoid crashing into furniture, but nowhere near enough for comfort. Jules's silhouette moved across the room, rummaging through her meticulously organized suitcase. "Hang on, I packed emergency supplies." "Of course you did." "Mock me now, but you'll be thanking me when..." "Ha!" Jules brandished a small flashlight triumphantly, its beam cutting through the dimness. Something about the storm made the suite feel smaller, more intimate. Rowan closed her laptop, figuring the resort Wi-Fi was probably down anyway. The muted emergency lights created strange shadows across the walls, and Rowan became acutely aware of how alone they really were. "I saw candles in the bathroom," she said, pushing off the bed. "I'll get them." In the marble bathroom, Rowan collected the assortment of scented candles, jasmine, coconut, something vaguely tropical she couldn't identify. She struck one of the complementary matches, touching flame to wick with precise movements. One by one, she lit them, arranging them methodically on surfaces around the suite: nightstands, dresser, coffee table, anywhere that wouldn't create a fire hazard. When she finished, the hibiscus suite had transformed. Soft, dancing light replaced the harsh emergency generators. The scents mingled pleasantly, creating an atmosphere that was dangerously romantic. Jules stood by the window, thunder briefly illuminating her profile. "Nice work, Price. If I didn't know better, I'd think you were setting the mood." Rowan's hands suddenly felt awkward, unsure where to rest. "Just being practical." "Right. Practicality is practically your middle name." "It's Elise, actually." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Jules turned, surprise visible even in the low light. "Rowan Elise? I didn't know that." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Everhart." A particularly violent crack of thunder made them both jump. Rain lashed sideways against the windows like it was trying to break in. "We're not going anywhere for a while," Jules said, moving away from the window. "And we did agree to get to know each other better." Rowan raised an eyebrow. "What did you have in mind? Ghost stories? Slumber party confessions?" 20 questions, Jules said, climbing onto the bed and crossing her legs. "The no-lies version." "What is this, summer camp?" Rowan scoffed, but her heart rate quickened traitorously. "Think of it as research. For our performance." Jules patted the comforter across from her. "You did promise to be a convincing fiancé." Rowan hesitated, eyeing the bed warily. This was precisely the kind of intimate scenario she'd been trying to avoid. Candlelight, storm outside, just the two of them. Yet she found herself moving toward the bed anyway. "Fine, but we're sitting on opposite sides." Rowan climbed onto the far end, creating a buffer zone of blankets and pillows between them. "And nothing too personal." Jules smirked. "Defeats the purpose, but okay. I'll start easy." The rain continued its assault outside as they settled in, the candles flickering with each draft that sneaked through the window seals. Rowan wrapped her arms around her knees, creating a physical barrier to match the emotional one. "Favorite book?" Jules asked. "That's your idea of research? My Goodreads profile could tell you that." "Humor me." Rowan considered lying just to be difficult, but something about the storm and golden light made her answer honestly. "I have a collection of Dickinson's poetry that's falling apart from rereading." "You?" "Practical as ever, Price." Jules didn't miss a beat. "Probably The Organized Mind by Daniel Levitin. Changed how I structure everything." Shockingly on brand. The game continued, questions bouncing between them like a tennis match. Midnight snack preferences. Rowan, salt and vinegar chips that left her fingers burning. Jules, peanut butter straight from the jar, which Rowan found oddly endearing. Most watched movies. Places they'd travel if money were no object. "Most embarrassing college moment," Jules said, leaning forward with obvious relish. Rowan groaned. "Besides losing the Macintosh debate to you junior year." "Besides that, yes." "Fine." Rowan took a breath. "Freshman year. I showed up to Professor Harrington's political theory final 15 minutes late because I mixed up the rooms." Jules gasped with theatrical shock. "The punctual Rowan Price? Late to an exam? I don't believe it." "I ran across campus so fast I was sweating through my shirt. Had to take the entire test looking like I'd just climbed out of a pool." Rowan surprised herself by grinning at the memory. "Your turn." Jules took a sip from her water bottle, stalling. "Promise not to use this against me?" "No promises in no lies 20 questions." "Fine." Jules sighed dramatically. "Marigold Hall. Spring formal. Senior year." Recognition dawned immediately. "Wait, that was you? The fire alarm incident?" "In my defense, I was trying to create a dry ice effect for the dance committee," Jules explained, talking with her hands as she always did when flustered. "How was I supposed to know it would trigger the smoke detectors?" Rowan couldn't help herself. She laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere rusty and underused. 300 people, evacuated in formal wear. In the rain. The dean was furious. "And I never confessed," Jules admitted, looking both proud and embarrassed. "Until now." "Your secret's safe with me, Everhart, though it explains a lot about your control issues. I prefer to call it attention to detail." Jules reached for a pillow, hugging it to her chest. Her eyes caught the candlelight in a way that made Rowan glance away. "My turn again. Why do you always carry 2 pens?" The question landed differently than the others, striking closer to something Rowan usually kept private. She instinctively reached for the pens in her pocket, one black, one blue, before realizing she wasn't wearing her jacket. "They're just pens," she deflected. Jules tilted her head. "You've carried them every day since freshman year, black and blue, always in your left inside pocket." "You noticed that?" "I notice everything about my competition." The rain had eased slightly, no longer pounding but still falling steadily. Candles guttered as Rowan considered how to answer, surprised that Jules had catalogued this detail about her. "My first day of kindergarten," she began slowly. "Everyone had these fancy pencil cases and new markers. My mom," she paused, weighing how much to reveal. "We didn't have much, so I showed up with 2 pencils in a Ziploc bag." Jules said nothing, just watched with an expression that wasn't pity, thank God, but something closer to understanding. "When I got that scholarship to Westmoreland," Rowan continued, "first thing I did was buy a really expensive pen, like ridiculously expensive, but I was still afraid of running out of ink or losing it or—" She shook her head. "So I started carrying backups. Then it just became a thing. Black for grading papers, blue for signatures and notes." "Your security blanket," Jules said softly. "I wouldn't call it," Rowan started to object, then stopped herself. "Yeah, I guess it is." Something shifted in the air between them. Rowan hadn't shared that particular story with anyone, not even her ex, yet here she was, telling Jules Everhard about her childhood insecurities by candlelight. The storm had created a strange bubble around them, a confessional space that felt separate from reality. Rowan watched Jules process this information, expecting some quick retort or change of subject. Instead, Jules simply listened, really listened, her usual kinetic energy temporarily stilled. She twisted her charm bracelet absently, the tiny gold pieces catching the light as her fingers moved over them. "Your turn," Jules said finally, her voice gentler than Rowan had ever heard it. Rowan considered her next question carefully, wanting to match the unexpected vulnerability Jules had drawn from her. "What's your biggest professional failure? The one that doesn't make it to the Instagram highlight reel?" For a moment, Jules looked like she might dodge the question. Her fingers stilled on her bracelet, and she inhaled sharply. "The Wellington Foundation Gala," she said, eyes fixed on some middle distance. "Last year." "I don't think I heard about that one." "You wouldn't have. I made sure of it." Jules shifted, the pillow still clutched to her chest like armor. "It was supposed to be my breakthrough event. Major donor list, celebrity MC, the works. I planned for 6 months." Rowan leaned forward despite herself, drawn in by the rare sight of Jules without her usual polish. Everything that could go wrong did. The catering company brought the wrong meals. The sound system failed during the keynote. Then the silent auction items? Jules shuddered visibly. Let's just say there was a misplaced decimal point that cost the foundation about $40,000. Ouch. The CEO fired me on the spot. In front of everyone, Jules' voice had gone small. I lost 3 other clients by association, had to rebuild almost from scratch. Without thinking, Rowan reached across the bed, her hand briefly touching Jules where it rested on the comforter. The contact was electric, warm skin against warm skin. Rowan pulled back almost immediately, shocked at her own impulse to comfort. "That's rough," she said, inadequately, retreating to her side of the bed. Jules looked equally startled by the touch, her eyes wide in the candlelight. "Yeah? Well, I bounced back. Eventually." The rain had slowed to a gentle patter, but the power showed no signs of returning. Shadows danced across Jules' face as she studied Rowan with an intensity that made something tighten in Rowan's chest. "My turn," Jules said, voice slightly husky. "Did you ever think about me after graduation?" The question hung between them, dangerously direct. Rowan considered lying, considered deflection, but found herself answering with partial truth instead. "Sometimes," she admitted, "usually when I'd win something and had no worthy opponent to celebrate defeating." Jules smiled, a real one that reached her eyes. "Backhanded compliment, I'll take it." Somewhere in the suite, Rowan spotted the welcome basket they'd ignored earlier, complete with a bottle of champagne. "We could use a drink for this interrogation." "Excellent idea." Rowan slid off the bed, grateful for the momentary escape from Jules' gaze. She unwrapped the foil, twisted the cork until it popped with a satisfying sound, and poured 2 glasses. The resort had provided actual champagne flutes. Another romantic touch she chose to ignore. "To surviving the storm," she said, handing Jules a glass as she climbed back onto the bed. "And to knowing thy enemy," Jules added with a wink. The champagne was surprisingly good, dry and crisp with tiny bubbles that caught in the back of Rowan's throat. The alcohol warmed her immediately, softening edges she'd been careful to keep sharp. The questions continued, lubricated by champagne and darkness. Worst dates: Rowan, the woman who brought her mother along; Jules, the guy who tried to expense their dinner to his company card and got caught; career triumphs that actually felt meaningful rather than just impressive on paper; the competitive drive that had defined both their college careers. Jules laughed harder at Rowan's dry observations than seemed proportionate, her head tipping back to expose the elegant line of her throat, something twisted in Rowan's stomach at the sight. "What about your charm bracelet?" Rowan asked, nodding toward Jules's wrist where gold caught the candlelight. "You're always playing with it." Jules' hand instinctively went to the bracelet, fingers closing protectively around it. "It was my grandmother's. She gave it to me before she died." "And the charms?" "Each one represents something important." Jules extended her wrist tentatively. "Want to see?" Rowan moved closer, careful to keep some distance between them as she examined the delicate bracelet. Jules pointed out each charm: a miniature graduation cap, a tiny house key, a champagne bottle, a passport. "And this one?" Rowan asked, finger hovering over what looked like a tiny podium. Jules hesitated. "It's nothing, just..." "Is that a debate podium?" "Maybe." Rowan looked up, finding Jules' face much closer than expected. "You have a charm commemorating our debates?" "Not ours, specifically," Jules said too quickly. "Just debate team in general." "May I?" Rowan asked, indicating the charm. Jules nodded, extending her wrist. Rowan gently took Jules' hand, turning it slightly to examine the small gold podium. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away. "You were my favorite competitor," Jules whispered, barely audible over the rain. Rowan looked up to find Jules watching her, eyes dark in the candlelight, the air between them charged with something Rowan had been denying for years. "Was I?" Rowan managed, her voice strange to her own ears. "No one else ever pushed me like you did." Jules' eyes flickered briefly to Rowan's lips, so quickly Rowan might have imagined it, except she hadn't imagined the way Jules' pulse quickened beneath her fingertips, where they still rested against her wrist. For 3 heartbeats, Rowan counted them, 1, 2, 3. She leaned imperceptibly closer. Time suspended as her brain catalogued every detail: Jules' slightly parted lips, the faint vanilla scent of her perfume, the warmth radiating from her skin. Every sensation heightened by candlelight and champagne and years of unspoken tension. Reality crashed back with brutal clarity. What was she doing? This was Jules Everhart. This was a fake engagement. This was a terrible, terrible idea. Rowan jerked back abruptly, knocking over her champagne glass in the process. Golden liquid spread across the comforter as she scrambled to right it. "Shit. I'm sorry." It's fine, Jules said quickly, already reaching for tissues from the nightstand. They dabbed at the spill in awkward silence, careful not to let their hands touch again. Rowan felt her emotional walls rebuilding with each second, brick by metaphorical brick, until the protection was firmly back in place. "We should probably sleep," she said stiffly, gathering the damp tissues. "Tomorrow's performance requires rest." Jules looked like she might say something, her mouth opening slightly before closing again. Was that disappointment in her eyes, or just a trick of the candlelight? "You're right," Jules agreed, her professional mask slipping back into place. "Big day tomorrow." They blew out most of the candles, leaving just one burning on the far nightstand, in case the power stayed out. Rowan changed in the bathroom, giving herself a stern lecture in the mirror about boundaries and self-preservation. By the time she emerged, Jules was already under the covers on her designated side of the bed, back turned toward the center. Rowan slipped under the sheets on her side, hyper-aware of the warm body just inches away, separated by an invisible line down the middle of the mattress. "Good night, Rowan," came Jules' voice, muffled slightly by pillows. "Good night, Jules." Long after Jules' breathing had evened out in sleep, Rowan lay awake, replaying that almost moment, and wondering if she'd just saved herself from disaster or missed something she'd been waiting for since freshman year debate club.
Chapter 7. Mango Madness. Jules woke with the tickle of unfamiliar breath against her cheek. Consciousness crept in slowly, then all at once as realization flooded her system. She was curled up against Rowan's side, her head nestled into the hollow of her shoulder, one arm draped across a torso that definitely wasn't hers. The blanket barrier they'd carefully constructed between them last night had been completely demolished, a casualty of unconscious movements. For one suspended moment, Jules allowed herself to feel the comfort of it, the warmth, the subtle coconut scent of Rowan's shampoo, the steady rise and fall of her chest. It felt right, which was exactly why it was wrong. Jules snapped into action, extracting herself with the stealth of someone disarming an explosive. She rolled back to her designated side of the bed, heart hammering as Rowan stirred slightly, but didn't wake. A strand of auburn hair had fallen across Rowan's face, and Jules' fingers twitched with the inexplicable urge to brush it away. "Nope," she whispered to herself, slipping out of bed. "Not doing that." The bathroom provided sanctuary. Jules splashed cold water on her face, avoiding her own reflection. Last night's almost kiss played on repeat in her mind. The way Rowan's eyes had darkened in the candlelight, how she'd leaned forward just enough to make Jules think, and then pulled back, clearing her throat and suggesting they get some sleep. Jules's phone buzzed with a reminder. Today's itinerary: morning yoga, optional, breakfast buffet, mandatory social mingling, then the couple's cocktail competition at the Mango Tree Bar at 2 p.m. She typed out a quick message to Carmen. "Almost kissed R last night. Help. This is business arrangement, not rom-com." The reply came almost instantly. "Sure, Jan, send pics of the wedding dress." "Not helpful," Jules responded, then added, "And there's no wedding dress because there is no wedding." "Yet," Carmen replied with an insufferable kissing emoji. When Jules emerged from the bathroom, Rowan was sitting up in bed, hair adorably mussed, scrolling through her phone. She glanced up, with a look that was frustratingly unreadable. "Morning," she said, voice still rough with sleep. "You're up early." "Wedding stuff never sleeps," Jules quipped, diving into her suitcase to hide her flushed face. "Big day, cocktail competition, need to look the part." The part being, you know, casual but still fiancé material. Rowan's lips twitched. As opposed to the formal fiancé uniform? White gown, veil, something borrowed? "Hilarious," Jules muttered, pulling out 3 sundresses and holding them up in succession. "Green makes my eyes pop, but blue is more tropical, though red says confident competitor." "Wear the green," Rowan said, then stretched in a way that made Jules immediately look away. "It's always been your color." Jules stared at the green dress. "Always?" "Since college," Rowan clarified with a shrug. "You wore a green blazer to the collegiate debate finals, made an impression." "I lost that debate." "To me," Rowan reminded her with a smile that did unsettling things to Jules' stomach. "But it wasn't because of the blazer." The Mango Tree Bar had been transformed into Cocktail Competition Central. 8 stations were set up in a semicircle, each equipped with a blender, ice bucket, cutting board, and an array of tropical fruits and spirits. Jules spotted the matching aprons hanging on hooks at each station and made a beeline for the one marked for them. Her steps faltered when she saw what was embroidered across the fronts. "The Rivals," she read aloud, fingers tracing the red heart stitched between the words. "Who even?" "Mateo's work, I'm guessing," Rowan said, appearing at her shoulder. Jules turned to find Rowan looking unfairly good in white linen shorts and a sleeveless navy top that showed off toned arms Jules definitely hadn't been noticing all weekend. Rowan raised an eyebrow. No, Jules said quickly, handing over an apron. Just wondering what our strategy should be. Mateo bounded onto the small stage set up at the front of the bar area, microphone in hand and enthusiasm dialed to 11. Couples of Coral Haven, welcome to our cocktail chemistry challenge, he announced. 8 couples, 8 original cocktails, but only one can win the title of Most Passionate Mixologists. Jules exchanged a look with Rowan, who mouthed, "Passionate mixologists?" with such deadpan skepticism that Jules had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. The rules are simple, Mateo continued. Create an original cocktail that represents your relationship. Points awarded for taste, presentation, and, illegally, he wiggled his eyebrows, couple chemistry. Chemistry, right, Rowan muttered under her breath. Like we're a science experiment. Jules pretended not to hear, focusing instead on tying her apron. Their station was stocked with an assortment of fruits, herbs, and at least 6 kinds of rum. Let's brainstorm, she said, slipping automatically into event coordinator mode. What cocktail represents our relationship? Rowan picked up a jalapeno, examining it thoughtfully. Something that initially burns going down but leaves you wanting more. Very funny, Jules said, feeling heat creep up her neck that had nothing to do with peppers. What about something with opposing flavors that somehow work together? Sweet and spicy? Rivals who complement each other? Rowan nodded slowly. I can work with that. They moved around each other at the station. Rowan muddling mint and jalapeno while Jules measured rum and lime juice. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Jules' system. Fingers brushing while reaching for the same piece of fruit. Shoulders bumping as they worked side by side. Jules' normally laser-focused event planner concentration dissolved each time Rowan leaned close to suggest a mixology adjustment. More simple syrup, Rowan said, her breath warm against Jules' ear. It needs balance. Jules' hand wobbled slightly as she poured. Like us, all sweet on the surface with hidden fire underneath? Something like that, Rowan murmured. And was it Jules's imagination, or did her gaze linger on Jules's lips for a moment? They settled on a name, the debate team, a spicy sweet concoction with jalapeno-infused tequila, mango lime, and a rim of tahini that Rowan insisted would bring it all together. Jules was arranging their garnishes when a familiar voice cut through the festive atmosphere. Jules Everhart, I can't believe it. Jules froze, a lime wedge suspended mid-splice. She knew that voice. She'd once loved that voice late at night on the other end of the phone during her final year of college. Talia Bloom stood at the edge of their station, looking as effortlessly beautiful as ever in a flowing yellow jumpsuit. Beside her was an equally stunning woman with close-cropped hair and an arm draped possessively around Talia's waist. Talia, Jules' voice came out an octave too high. She instinctively grabbed Rowan's hand, squeezing so hard she felt Rowan wince. What a surprise! I know, when I saw your name on the guest list, I nearly fell over, Talia grinned. How long has it been? 3 years? 4, Jules corrected automatically, then plastered on her brightest smile. Let me introduce you to my fiancé, Rowan Price. The word fiancé still felt foreign on her tongue, but Jules plowed ahead. Ro, this is Talia Bloom, my college friend? Rowan arched a brow at the hesitation but extended her free hand. Nice to meet you. I've heard so much about Jules' college days. And this is Zoe, my girlfriend, Talia added, of 8 months now. Zoe nodded coolly, her gaze bouncing between Jules and Rowan with analytical precision. So how did you two happen? Talia asked, gesturing between them. Last I heard, you two were academic rivals who could barely stand each other. Well, Jules began, her mind racing. It all started at a publishing conference. Rowan cut in smoothly. 2 years ago, we ran into each other at the hotel bar. started arguing about Faulkner versus Hemingway, and somehow ended up having dinner instead of networking. Jules blinked, caught off guard by the specificity. They hadn't rehearsed this part. "And the proposal?" Talia prompted, her smile curious. "I asked her," Rowan continued without missing a beat, her thumb absently stroking the back of Jules' hand in a way that felt distractingly authentic. "During a rainstorm. Jules always said she loved dancing in the rain, so when we got caught in a downpour after dinner at her favorite restaurant, it felt like the universe giving me a sign." Jules stared at Rowan, momentarily speechless. The detail about dancing in the rain wasn't part of their prepared background. It was a real preference Jules had mentioned exactly once during a late-night study session their sophomore year. How could Rowan possibly remember that? "So romantic," Talia sighed, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, we should let you get back to your cocktail. Maybe catch up later at the welcome dinner?" "Definitely," Jules nodded, her smile tight. As the pair walked away, she turned to Rowan and whispered, "Dancing in the rain? How did you know that?" Rowan shrugged, focusing intently on slicing a mango. "You mentioned it once, it stuck." Before Jules could process that, Matteo announced they had 15 minutes remaining. The competition intensified around them, couples laughing, tasting, adjusting their creations. Jules couldn't help noticing Talia and Zoe at their station across the bar, their movements together fluid and natural. When Zoe casually kissed Talia's temple, Jules felt a pang of something uncomfortably like jealousy. She glanced up to find Talia watching them, her expression skeptical. The insecurity that washed over Jules was immediate and overwhelming. Without thinking, she reached up to tuck a strand of hair behind Rowan's ear, letting her fingers linger. "How's the garnish coming along, babe?" she asked, her voice honey-sweet. Rowan froze momentarily, then recovered. "Almost done. Just need the perfect lime wheel." Jules laughed, too loudly at what wasn't really a joke, and positioned herself unnecessarily close as they assembled their final presentation. She could feel Talia's eyes on them, which only made her escalate her performance. Touching Rowan's arm when she spoke, resting her chin on Rowan's shoulder to look at their cocktail. "Laying it on a bit thick, aren't we?" Rowan murmured, though she didn't pull away. "She's watching," Jules whispered back, "and she doesn't believe us." "You dated her," Rowan said. It wasn't a question. "Briefly. Senior year. It ended when—" Jules stopped herself. "When I decided to focus on my career instead." Something flickered across Rowan's face, but before she could respond, Matteo called them up for a presentation. Standing before the small crowd gathered around the bar, Jules found her professional presentation mode kicking in. "We call our cocktail the debate team," she began, gesturing to their ruby-red creation garnished with lime wheels and mint. "It represents how we started, as rivals who challenged each other at every turn. The jalapeno tequila provides heat," Rowan added, demonstrating their mixing technique, "while the mango sweetness balances it out, like how Jules' optimism balances my cynicism. And the tahine rim," Jules continued, "adds complexity, because nothing about our relationship has ever been simple." Their performative banter felt increasingly natural. When Rowan dryly commented on their passionate debate techniques, eventually extending beyond the classroom, Jules found herself genuinely laughing. And when their fingers intertwined as they offered sample sips to the judges, the contact no longer felt calculated, it felt necessary. As the judges deliberated, Jules spotted Talia whispering to Zoe while glancing their way. Something competitive and primordial flared in Jules' chest. Without thinking through the consequences, she turned to Rowan. "Sorry, just go with it," she whispered, then rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to Rowan's. She meant it to be quick, a performance piece, a statement for Talia's benefit. But Rowan's initial surprise melted almost instantly, her free hand coming up to cup Jules' cheek as she kissed her back. The kiss deepened, softened. Jules forgot they were being watched, forgot they were pretending, forgot everything but the taste of lime and sugar and something distinctly, intoxicatingly Rowan. The background noise of the competition faded away, replaced by the rush of blood in her ears and the startling realization that this was what had been missing from every relationship she'd had since college. And our winners for most passionate mixologists are Jules and Rowan with the debate team. Mateo's voice cut through their moment, accompanied by applause and the click of several cameras. They broke apart, both visibly shaken. Jules couldn't look at Rowan directly as they accepted their certificate, afraid of what she might see, or worse, what Rowan might see in her. "Congratulations, you two," Mateo said with a knowing grin. "Though I think we all know the real winner here was that kiss. Seriously, get a room." Jules laughed weakly, her fingers trembling slightly against the certificate. "We have a room," she said without thinking, then felt heat rush to her face as several wedding guests hooted in appreciation. "I meant, that's not what she stammered, then fell silent as Rowan's arm slid around her waist. "What my eloquent fiancé means," Rowan said, "is thank you for the competition. It was enlightening." As they stepped away from the spotlight, certificate in hand, Jules finally dared to look at Rowan directly. Her usual composure was fractured, her eyes darker than Jules had ever seen them, her lips slightly parted, as if she had 1,000 questions, but couldn't form a single one. "I'm sorry," Jules whispered. I didn't mean—" "Don't," Rowan said softly. "Just not now." She gently released Jules' waist and walked toward their room, leaving Jules standing amid the celebration with a certificate in her hand, the ghost of Rowan's lips still burning against hers, and the unsettling certainty that the line between pretending and reality had just been irrevocably blurred.
Chapter 8. The Spa Situation. Rowan stared at her coffee with an intensity it definitely didn't deserve. She traced the rim of the porcelain cup with her index finger, willing the dark liquid to reveal the secrets of the universe, or, at the very least, how to handle sitting 3 feet from Jules without spontaneously combusting. Last night's kiss hung between them like a physical presence. Yesterday at the bar, it had been chaos and impulse, Jules spotting her ex across the room and suddenly transforming into a barnacle attached to Rowan's side. The kiss itself had been quick but electrifying, leaving Rowan's lips tingling for hours afterward, and Jules had played it off as brilliant strategy, a perfect performance for their audience. Except it hadn't felt like performance, not to Rowan. "Are you going to drink that coffee or just hypnotize it?" Jules broke the silence, her voice overly bright. She wore coral linen shorts and a sleeveless white blouse, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Even her casual clothes looked planned. "I'm communing with it," Rowan replied, finally taking a sip. "Some relationships require patience." Jules snorted, moving around their suite with precise, busy movements. She'd been arranging and rearranging items on the dresser for the past 10 minutes, all while maintaining a careful orbit that kept her at least arm's length from Rowan. "So," Jules said, setting down a bottle of sunscreen with dramatic finality, "I was thinking we should use our couple's massage voucher today." Rowan choked on her coffee. "Our what?" "The voucher that was in our welcome basket. For the Orchid Spa." She waved a cream-colored slip of paper. "It would be suspicious not to use it. Plus, free massage, right?" Rowan's hand instinctively reached for the blue pen tucked behind her ear, gripping it like a talisman. The thought of being half-naked and vulnerable with Jules mere feet away twisted her stomach into elaborate knots. "Right," she managed, suspicious. "Great!" Jules clapped her hands together. "I booked us for 11. That gives us an hour to finish breakfast." Rowan nodded, grip tightening around her pen. "Just a massage, in a professional environment, with Jules. Nothing to freak out about." Absolutely nothing. The Orchid Spa smelled like paradise, if paradise were distilled into essential oils and piped through hidden diffusers. Flowing white curtains partitioned private treatment areas, creating an ethereal landscape as they followed the attendant through the space. "Your hibiscus sweet couples treatment room," the attendant announced, waving them into a candlelit sanctuary. Please disrobe to your comfort level and put on the provided robes. Your therapists will knock before entering." The door closed with a soft click, leaving them alone. Rowan became suddenly, intensely interested in the hexagonal pattern of the floor tiles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides. Multiply that by how many tiles were there exactly? She should count them, all of them, right now, while Jules was. The soft rustle of clothing being removed destroyed Rowan's concentration. "The tiles aren't going anywhere," Jules teased, her voice uncharacteristically soft. "They might, you never know with hexagons, shifty shapes." Rowan kept her eyes down as she heard the whisper of Jules slipping into her robe. When she finally risked looking up, Jules was standing by one of the massage tables, wrapped in plush white terry cloth, her bare legs emerging from beneath the hem. Her hair was piled on top of her head in a messy bun, wispy tendrils framing her face. Without her usual perfect styling and confident stance, she looked younger, softer. Rowan's throat went dry. "Should I turn around?" Jules asked, eyebrows arched. "No, it's fine," Rowan mumbled, quickly turning away herself. She shucked her clothes efficiently, pulling the robe on and tying it with decisive movements. When she turned back, Jules was perched on the edge of her massage table, swinging her feet slightly. She looked nervous. That was new. Jules Everhart. Nervous? A gentle knock interrupted the moment. 2 massage therapists entered, introducing themselves as Kai and Lena. "Face down to begin, please," Kai instructed. "You can place your face in the cradle. We'll step out while you get comfortable." When the door closed again, Rowan and Jules exchanged a glance that contained at least 17 different emotions, none of which Rowan could fully identify. "Hatter you?" Jules said. "Age before beauty," Rowan countered automatically. Jules snorted, a genuine laugh escaping. "I'm literally 6 months older than you." "Exactly," Rowan grinned, the familiar banter easing some of the tension. "Ancient." They both moved to their tables, slipping under the sheets and adjusting themselves face down. When Rowan turned her head in the cradle, she found herself looking directly at Jules, whose table was barely 2 feet away. Jules' eyes were closed, her features relaxed in a way Rowan rarely saw. Without the performance, without the constant vigilance and planning and perfect smile, Jules looked almost peaceful. It hit Rowan then. How exhausting it must be to maintain that level of control, to calculate every word, plan every outfit, anticipate every outcome. Jules had always been like that, since freshman year when she'd color-coded her planner and organized study groups with military precision. Rowan had found it infuriating then. Now she just found it sad, and somehow endearing. The therapists returned and began their work. Warm oil and expert hands melted into Rowan's shoulders, releasing knots she hadn't realized she was carrying. She tried to lose herself in the sensation, in the rhythmic pressure dissolving months of tension. But all she could focus on were Jules' small sighs of pleasure, little catches of breath when the therapist hit a sensitive spot, soft exhales of relief. These microscopic sounds painted an intimate audio landscape that the thin screen between them did nothing to diminish. Each tiny noise traveled straight through Rowan, settling low in her abdomen. "Please, turn onto your back," Lena instructed after what felt like both eternity and no time at all. Rowan complied, adjusting herself beneath the sheet. As she settled, her eyes automatically drifted toward Jules, and found Jules already looking at her. Green eyes met hazel in a moment of absolute clarity. No performance, no audience, no strategy, just recognition. Rowan quickly closed her eyes, heart hammering against her ribs. But closing her eyes didn't help. She was more aware than ever of Jules's presence, of her breathing, of the small shifts of her body on the adjacent table. The rest of the massage passed in a blur of sensation, both the therapist's skilled touch and the hyper-awareness of Jules just inches away, separated by nothing but air and thin cotton sheets. "We'll leave you both to relax and hydrate," Kai announced finally. "Take your time. There's lemon water and tea on the side table." The door closed behind the therapist with a soft click. Rowan sat up slowly, keeping the sheet wrapped around her as she reached for her robe. She slipped it on beneath the covers, a maneuver that required flexibility she'd forgotten she possessed, before emerging fully clothed in terry cloth. Jules was already up, standing by the tea station with her back to Rowan. Her robe was securely tied, her hair tumbling loose around her shoulders. As Rowan watched, Jules gathered her chestnut waves and began braiding them with practiced movements. Quick, efficient, methodical. The gesture catapulted Rowan back a decade. Jules, 20 years old, braiding her hair before their Lincoln Douglas debate final. That same concentrated expression, those same nimble fingers working with determined focus. Rowan had watched then, too, fascinated despite herself by the ritual. "Staring is still rude, Price," Jules said without turning around. The exact words she'd said all those years ago in that fluorescent-lit prep room. "Old habits," Rowan replied softly. Jules secured the end of her braid with an elastic from her wrist, then turned to face Rowan. Something vulnerable lingered in her expression. "About yesterday's kiss?" "It was convincing," Rowan interrupted, defaulting to nonchalance. She reached for a glass of water, needing something to do with her hands. "Good strategy." Jules took a step closer. "It didn't feel like strategy to me." Her voice dropped lower. "Did it to you?" Rowan stared at her hands, watching condensation gather on the glass. A dozen deflections rose to her lips, familiar armor against vulnerability. But here, in this quiet room, wrapped in soft robes, skin still warm from touch. The truth felt easier. "No," she admitted, looking up. "It didn't feel fake." Jules moved to sit beside her on the edge of the massage table, close enough that their shoulders touched through the plush robes. Neither pulled away. The scent of jasmine oil clung to Jules' skin, mingling with that underlying note that was just her. Something bright and clean that Rowan had always been able to identify, even blindfolded. "I keep telling myself this is just for show," Jules said quietly, "that we're just putting on a performance, but then—" She trailed off, her fingers fidgeting with the tie of her robe. "Then what?" Rowan prompted, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "Then you look at me like you did in college, like you're trying to figure me out, and I forget all my lines." The admission hung between them, fragile and honest. Rowan felt her carefully maintained composure begin to crack around the edges. 10 years of practiced indifference threatened to collapse under the weight of Jules' candor. "Was there ever a moment, back then, when you thought about—" Rowan couldn't finish the sentence, the words sticking in her throat, but she didn't need to. Recognition flared instantly in Jules' eyes. "Every day," Jules whispered, "especially after that night in the debate prep room." Rowan's breath caught. They'd never spoken about that night, the almost moment when argument had turned to something else, when Jules had stepped into her space, eyes bright with challenge and something deeper. Something neither of them had been brave enough to name. They'd stood, breathing the same air for 3 heartbeats before Jules had stepped back, gathered her notes, and left. "I convinced myself I imagined it," Rowan said. "That I was projecting or—" Jules touched Rowan's cheek with tentative fingers, the gesture so unexpectedly gentle that Rowan's words dissolved into silence. Her carefully maintained composure fractured completely as Jules traced her jawline with feather-light pressure. "I've spent 10 years trying not to think about what almost happened in that debate prep room," Rowan admitted, her voice barely audible. Jules leaned forward, erasing the remaining distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that had nothing to do with appearances or strategy or the wedding around them. This kiss was slower than yesterday's, deeper, and devastatingly real. Jules' hand curved around the nape of Rowan's neck, drawing her closer as Rowan's fingers tangled in Jules' braid. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, they remained close, foreheads pressed together, sharing air. "What happens when the wedding ends?" Jules whispered, vulnerability raw in her voice. Rowan didn't have an answer. not one that wouldn't sound like either false promise or premature retreat. Instead, she found Jules' hand and interlaced their fingers, holding on tightly. The gesture landed somewhere between promise and question mark, between past and possibility. "We've never been very good at endings, have we?" Rowan said softly. Jules laughed, the sound warm against Rowan's lips. "We've never even managed a proper goodbye." "Maybe we should work on our beginning first," Rowan suggested. "See where that takes us." Always so logical, Jules rolled her eyes, but her thumb traced patterns against Rowan's palm. "Fine. Where do beginnings usually start?" "Well," Rowan smiled, tugging Jules a fraction closer. "If we're being technical, this one started 10 years ago in a badly ventilated classroom, but I'm willing to count yesterday as the official launch date." "Yesterday was a performance," Jules countered, eyebrows raised. "Then how about right now?" Rowan asked, letting vulnerability show in her expression. No audience, no strategy, just us. Jules's smile was slow and genuine, none of her usual calculated charm. "Just us," she echoed, leaning in again. Their third kiss tasted like honesty.
Chapter 9. Vows and Other Lies. Jules woke with the feeling of warmth against her shoulder. Her eyelids fluttered open as awareness crept in, bringing with it the realization that the carefully constructed pillow barrier had failed during the night. Spectacularly failed. Rowan's sleeping form had migrated to Jules's side of the bed, one arm draped across her midsection. Auburn hair splayed across the pillow they now shared. Her face was relaxed in sleep, all sharp edges and guardedness temporarily abandoned. Jules held her breath, afraid the slightest movement might disrupt this unguarded moment. Her fingers hovered just above Rowan's hair, so close she could almost feel the silky texture against her skin. A half-inch more and she could brush that wayward strand from Rowan's forehead, could trace the curve of her cheekbone, could... Jules yanked her hand back as if burned, carefully extracting herself from beneath Rowan's arm with a surgeon's precision. She slid out of bed, grabbing her phone from the nightstand before escaping to the bathroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she closed the door with a silent click. With shaking fingers, she opened her messages to Carmen. "We kissed. For real. No audience. Help." The 3 dots appeared immediately. Of course Carmen was awake at this ungodly hour. "Finally, details or death, Everhart?" Jules slumped against the cool tile wall, sliding down until she sat on the floor. "Not finally, disaster. I can't fake date someone I actually want to date?" "You mean someone you've always wanted to date? Fixed that for you." "Not helping." The dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "Look, you have 2 options. 1, keep pretending this is pretend and suffer. 2, tell her the truth and maybe get everything you've secretly wanted for a decade. Your move, coward." Jules groaned, letting her head fall back against the wall with a soft thud. Carmen's advice was unhelpfully accurate, as usual. The memory of last night's kiss in the spa suite flooded back. Rowan's hand at the nape of her neck, the softness of her lips, the way Jules had practically melted into her touch. A gentle knock at the door jolted her back to reality. "Bathroom hog," came Rowan's sleep-roughened voice. "Some of us have morning breath to address." Jules scrambled to her feet, quickly splashing water on her face before opening the door. "All yours," she chirped, voice unnaturally bright as she slipped past Rowan without quite meeting her eyes. She could do this. She could absolutely pretend that kissing Rowan Price hadn't rearranged every molecule in her body. Piece of cake. "More coffee?" Jules asked, lifting the carafe from their breakfast table. The resort's outdoor dining terrace offered a spectacular ocean view, the morning sun glinting off turquoise waters. "I'm good," Rowan replied, studying Jules over the rim of her cup. "You're very chipper this morning." "Am I?" Jules poured herself a 3rd cup. "Just excited for all the wedding activities. Savvy texted that there's a vow workshop at the Pearl Pavilion at 11. Rowan nodded slowly. Right. Fake vows for our fake engagement. Sounds perfectly normal. Jules laughed a touch too loudly, pushing scrambled eggs around her plate. Exactly. Should be fun. Jules? Rowan started, her voice lowering. About last night? Oh look, Mateo's waving us over. Jules stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her water glass. There was, in fact, no Mateo in sight, but the lie bought her precious seconds to compose herself. When Rowan's hand found hers under the table, Jules nearly jumped out of her skin. The touch was casual, intimate, and terrifying in how right it felt. When she spotted Talia and her girlfriend approaching their table, Jules instinctively pulled her hand away. She missed the flash of hurt that crossed Rowan's face, too busy arranging her features into a perfect society smile as Talia reached their table. "Lovebirds," Talia cooed, one arm around her girlfriend's waist. "We keep missing you at events. How's engaged life treating you?" "Blissful," Jules responded automatically. "Just absolutely." She waved her hands vaguely. "Blissful. You two are surprisingly cute together," Talia said, her gaze lingering on Rowan. "Never would have called it back in college, but it makes sense now." "How so?" Rowan asked, her tone politely curious but with an underlying edge that made Jules glance at her sharply. Talia laughed. "All that competitive energy had to go somewhere, right? I always thought you two either needed to fight it out or—" She raised an eyebrow suggestively. "Or," Rowan finished with a tight smile. Jules felt her cheeks heat. "Anyway, isn't the resort just gorgeous? Have you tried the pineapple pancakes? They're to die for." She embarked on a rambling food review while Rowan watched her with an increasingly distant expression. By the time Talia and her girlfriend moved on, the air between them had cooled 10 degrees. Rowan dabbed her napkin against her lips and stood. "I'll meet you at the pavilion," she said quietly. "I need to get something from the room." Before Jules could respond, Rowan was gone, leaving her with a half-eaten breakfast and the sinking feeling that she was spectacularly screwing this up. The Pearl Pavilion was somehow even more stunning than its name suggested. A gleaming white structure perched at the edge of the private beach, its graceful columns wrapped with delicate flowering vines. Sheer white curtains billowed in the ocean breeze, creating the illusion that the entire structure might lift off and float away at any moment. Jules spotted Rowan already seated inside, her auburn hair catching the sunlight. She'd changed into a simple linen sundress in a shade of blue that made Jules' heart do a complicated somersault. "Just in time," Savvy exclaimed, pulling Jules into a hug as she approached. "We're about to start the vow workshop." "The what now?" Jules asked, though she'd heard perfectly well at breakfast. "Vow workshop." Savvy's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Every couple gets to write mock vows for fun and inspiration. You and Rowan must have tons of romantic material after all these years of tension." She winked, actually winked, before moving to the front of the pavilion where Danny was distributing elegant cream-colored stationery and fountain pens. Jules slid into the seat next to Rowan, who acknowledged her with a small nod. "So, vows?" "Apparently," Jules agreed, accepting a sheet of paper from Danny with a smile of thanks. "All right, everyone," Sammy clapped her hands for attention. "This is just for fun, but really try to dig deep. What do you love about your person? What promises do you want to make? Don't overthink it, just write from the heart." Jules stared at her blank paper. Write from the heart? Her heart was currently a tangled mess of decade-old feelings, fresh confusion, and the lingering sensation of Rowan's lips against hers. "You look constipated," Rowan observed quietly. "Just thinking," Jules muttered, tapping her pen against the paper. "Isn't that what you're best at, overthinking?" There was a teasing note in Rowan's voice, but it lacked the warmth of yesterday. "I excel at many things, thank you very much." Jules straightened her shoulders. "Vow writing is surely one of them." Rowan's lips twitched. "I'll leave you to it then." She rose gracefully, moving to a corner of the pavilion where a small writing desk sat beneath billowing white curtains. Jules watched her go, then glanced down at her still blank paper. After a moment's hesitation, she began to write. I, Jules, take you, Rowan, to be my completely fake wife. I promise to always let you win arguments, to catalog your absurdly extensive pen collection, and to never again mention the time you cried during that commercial with the penguin. She paused, reading over the sarcastic lines. They were funny enough, she supposed. Safe. A performance piece designed to maintain their charade while getting a laugh. But as soon as she set her pen down, she knew it wasn't enough. These weren't the words that wanted to be written. With a glance to make sure Rowan was still engrossed in her own writing, Jules flipped the paper over and started again. Rowan, I promise to see you, not just the rival I created in my mind, but the woman who challenges me to be genuine instead of perfect. I promise to remember how your eyes look in morning light like amber holding secrets. I promise to finally admit that half my college achievements were just to make you notice me. Her hand moved across the page almost without her conscious direction, words pouring out, unchecked. I promise to stop pretending that our first meeting was anything less than earthquake significant. To acknowledge that for 10 years, I've measured every relationship against the way arguing with you made me feel, more alive than kissing anyone else. Jules paused, her heart pounding. She was writing too much, revealing too much, but she couldn't seem to stop. I promise to accept that maybe we wasted a decade on pride and fear, that maybe all those almost moments were chances we were too scared to take. I promise to stop being afraid of how you make me feel. Champagne break, Matteo announced suddenly, breaking Jules' concentration. Come get refreshed before we share our masterpieces. Jules exhaled slowly, staring at the words she'd just written. Words she could never, ever share. Not if she wanted to survive this weekend with her dignity intact. She laid down her pen and rubbed her temples, not noticing Rowan approaching until her shadow fell across the table. Writer's block? Rowan asked, setting down 2 flutes of champagne. Jules jumped, instinctively flipping her paper to the sarcastic side. Just finishing up? Rowan tilted her head. Let me guess. You've written a bullet-pointed list of all the ways I annoy you, but somehow made it sound romantic. I would never, Jules protested, trying to ignore how well Rowan knew her. It's a paragraph-formatted list, thank you very much. Rowan's laugh was genuine then, the first real one Jules had heard all morning. Before she could respond, Matteo called everyone back to share their vows, and Jules moved to join the circle, not noticing that she'd left both drafts on the table. She was halfway to the seating area when she heard Rowan's sharp intake of breath. Turning, Jules froze as she saw Rowan holding both papers, her eyes wide as they moved across the second page. Jules lunged forward, snatching the papers from Rowan's hands with a too-bright laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Hey, no peeking at the competition. Rowan's expression was impossible to read. Surprise, confusion, and something else flickering across her features before her usual composure reasserted itself. I didn't mean to. You left them. It's fine, Jules cut her off, stuffing both papers into her purse. I was just exploring different tones. This one's obviously ridiculous. She tapped her purse where the honest vows now hid. I mean, can you imagine me saying all that sappy stuff with a straight face? Something shuddered behind Rowan's eyes. The openness, the vulnerability from just moments before, gone. Replaced by the careful mask Jules recognized from their first day. Right, Rowan said flatly. Ridiculous. Jules, Rowan, you're up, Savvy called from the circle. Jules plastered on her event planner's smile and headed for the group, aware of Rowan following a precise 2 steps behind her. Who wants to start? Savvy asked, looking between them expectantly. I will, Jules volunteered, retrieving her first draft. She read the sarcastic vows with just enough inflection to draw appreciative laughter from the group, especially at the line about Rowan's pen collection. When she finished, All eyes turned to Rowan, who remained seated, her own paper folded neatly in her pocket. "I think I'll pass," she said quietly. "Oh, come on," Sappy protested. "We want to hear yours too." Rowan's gaze briefly met Jules's, then skittered away. Some things aren't meant for an audience. A disappointed murmur went through the group before Sappy directed attention to the next couple. Jules returned to her seat, hyper-aware of the careful distance Rowan maintained between them. The reception following the vow workshop was held on the pavilion's adjoining deck, where white-jacketed servers passed trays of tropical appetizers and fruit-garnished cocktails. Jules accepted a drink and took a large sip, trying to calm her nerves. Across the deck, Rowan was speaking with another wedding guest, smiling politely but without the warmth Jules had glimpsed yesterday in the spa suite. When Talia approached them to offer congratulations, Rowan accepted with perfect poise, but subtly stepped away when Jules attempted to slip an arm around her waist. The message was clear: whatever tenuous connection had been building between them was now on ice. After 20 minutes of this careful choreography, Rowan excused herself to check on something at the front desk, leaving Jules alone with her third cocktail and the mockery of being abandoned by her fake fiancé. She found an empty table at the edge of the deck and sank into a chair, absently reaching into her purse for her phone. Her fingers brushed paper instead. The vows she'd written. Jules unfolded the second page, reading over the words that had apparently spooked Rowan so thoroughly. Her eyes lingered on the final line. "I promise to stop being afraid of how you make me feel." Across the pavilion, she spotted Rowan returning, stopping to chat with Danny near the bar. She looked more relaxed than she'd been all afternoon, laughing at something he said as she accepted a glass of water. Jules folded the paper carefully, tucking it into her pocket. Instead of returning to Rowan's side as a proper fake fiancé should, she sent a quick text to Carmen. "I think I blew it. Broke real feelings in fake vows. She saw them, now treating me like I have the plague." Carmen's reply was instant. "You're both idiots, use your words." Easy for Carmen to say, Jules thought bitterly. She hadn't spent a decade building elaborate defenses against Rowan Price, only to have them crumble after one kiss. Back in the hibiscus suite that evening, the silence between them was deafening. Jules organized her toiletries with obsessive precision, alphabetizing her skincare products while Rowan sat cross-legged on the bed, reading something on her phone. "We should review tomorrow's schedule," Jules finally said, her voice strange and formal even to her own ears. "Savvy added a beachfront yoga session at 7 a.m.? Rowan looked up from her phone, expressionless. "I think we can skip the couple activities tomorrow, give ourselves a break. But the whole point is to convince everyone that—" "I know what the point is, Jules." Rowan's voice was tired. "But maybe we need a day off from pretending." Jules flinched at the emphasis on the last word. She rearranged her facial cleanser and toner for the third time. "Is this about the vows? Because those were just you exploring different tones. You said that already." Rowan set her phone down. "It's fine, I get it." "I don't think you do," Jules said softly, still facing the bathroom counter. "Oh?" There was a challenge in Rowan's voice now. "Then explain it to me, Everhart. What exactly am I missing?" Jules turned slowly, meeting Rowan's gaze across the room. The honest vows felt heavy in her pocket, but she couldn't bring herself to take them out. Couldn't bear to see the rejection in Rowan's eyes if she admitted the truth. "Nothing," she said finally. "You're not missing anything. Early yoga sounds terrible anyway." Rowan watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Glad we're on the same page." She slid under the covers, carefully reconstructing the pillow barrier that had failed so spectacularly the night before. Jules remained in the bathroom doorway, wrestling with the urge to cross the room, to pull out those stupid vows and read every word aloud, to tell Rowan that none of this was fake anymore. Maybe it never had been. Instead, she switched off the bathroom light and moved to her side of the bed, maintaining a careful distance from the pillow wall between them. "Good night," she offered quietly. "Night," Rowan replied, already turning away. Jules stared at the ceiling, acutely aware of every inch between them. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant sound of waves against the shore and the steady rhythm of her own cowardice.
Chapter 10. The Charm and the Chill. Rowan woke to a soft, pinkish glow filtering through the gauzy curtains of the suite. Her eyes fluttered open reluctantly, body immediately aware of the warmth radiating from Jules's sleeping form on the other side of the pillow barrier they'd constructed between them. Sometime during the night, the barricade had partially collapsed, and now Jules's hand rested just inches from her own. She studied Jules' profile in the dim light, the gentle curve of her cheek, the slight furrow between her brows that remained even in sleep, as though she was mentally organizing something in her dreams. The ache in Rowan's chest intensified, and she carefully extracted herself from the sheets, moving with practiced stealth born from years of early morning departures from uncomfortable situations. The wooden floor was cool beneath her bare feet as she padded to the sliding glass door. She slipped out onto the balcony, pulling the door closed with barely a click. The morning air carried a slight chill, raising goosebumps along her arms as she settled into one of the wicker chairs overlooking the ocean. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but its approach painted the sky and water in a watercolor palette of gold, coral pink, and pale lavender. Rowan pulled her knees to her chest and wrapped her arms around them, finding herself thinking of Jules' charm bracelet. How the colors of the sunrise matched the rose gold links and the pastel stones set into several of the charms. She'd noticed Jules touching it often, especially when nervous or deep in thought, a physical reminder of a life carefully documented, meticulously celebrated. Rowan had never been one for sentimentality. No scrapbooks, few photographs, minimal keepsakes. What did that say about her? That she lived too much in her head and not enough in moments worth preserving? The sun crested the horizon, spilling light across the water in a path that seemed to lead directly to the resort. For a moment, it was breathtaking enough to push aside thoughts of yesterday's vow workshop disaster, of the way Jules had laughed away her genuine feelings, of the growing certainty that this entire charade was a mistake. Behind her, the door slid open. Rowan. "Hey!" Jules' voice was sleep-rough, hesitant. "You're up early?" "Couldn't sleep," Rowan replied, eyes still fixed on the horizon. Jules lingered in the doorway, uncertainty radiating from her like a physical force. "It's beautiful," she finally offered, nodding toward the sunrise. "Yes." The silence stretched taut between them, filled with all the things they weren't saying. After a moment, Jules retreated back inside with a quiet, "I'm going to shower before breakfast." Rowan released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. 2 more days. Just 2 more days of pretending, of catching herself whenever she forgot this wasn't real, of watching Jules switch effortlessly between performance and reality until Rowan couldn't tell the difference anymore. She could manage 2 more days. The wedding party breakfast was a lavish affair, set up on the Flamingo Terrace, with mimosas flowing freely and platters of tropical fruits arranged in Instagram-weathered displays. Rowan selected a seat toward the end of the long table, away from the center where Savvy held court, describing her excitement for tomorrow's ceremony with animated gestures. Jules arrived 15 minutes late, her hair styled in loose waves and wearing a sundress the color of ripe peaches. She swept in with apologies and air kisses, pulling up the chair beside Rowan with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Sorry I'm late," she murmured, leaning close enough that her hair brushed Rowan's shoulder. "Did I miss anything?" "Just Mateo's aunt doing an impromptu toast that made Savvy's mother cry," Rowan replied, sliding her untouched mimosa toward Jules. "Here, you look like you need this more than I do." Jules accepted the glass with a flicker of genuine surprise, her fingers brushing Rowan's. "Thanks." Around them, conversation flowed. Discussions about the welcome bags, tomorrow's weather forecast, someone's flight cancellation drama. Rowan picked at her fruit plate, hyper-aware of Jules beside her, chatting with Elle across the table about last-minute seating chart adjustments. There was something performative about the way Jules held herself this morning, as though she'd slipped fully back into event planner mode. Her laugh was a touch too bright, her gestures a shade too expansive. She was doing what Jules always did best, creating a diversion, building a beautiful smokescreen to hide whatever she didn't want people to see. As Jules gesticulated while explaining something to Elle about placecard holders, Rowan caught a glint of gold. The motion caused Jules's charm bracelet to slide, and something small detached, falling to the tiled floor beneath her chair with a tiny, almost imperceptible, clink. Rowan glanced down to see a small flamingo charm resting by her foot. Without drawing attention to it, she reached down as though retrieving her napkin and picked up the charm, feeling its delicate weight in her palm. She slipped it into the pocket of her linen pants without a word, unsure why she didn't simply hand it back immediately. "Don't you think, Ro?" Rowan looked up to find Jules watching her expectantly, clearly having asked a question she hadn't heard. "Sorry, I was miles away," she admitted. Jules's brow furrowed slightly. "I was just telling Elle about our plan to skip the group sailing excursion this afternoon." "Since we've both done it before?" A lie, seamlessly delivered. They'd never discussed skipping anything, but Rowan nodded along, playing her part. "Right, yes. It seemed like a good chance to catch up on some calls." Another lie, just as smooth. How easily they'd fallen into this pattern. Savvy's voice cut through the various conversations, commanding attention as she stood and tapped her mimosa glass with a spoon. "Everyone, a quick announcement about today's schedule." The table quieted, all eyes turning toward the bride-to-be, who looked radiant in a white sundress with "Bride" spelled out in rhinestones across the front. "So," Savvy continued, beaming, "after a long talk with my meditation coach, I've decided everyone needs reflection time before tomorrow's ceremony. The sailing trip is now optional, and I'm encouraging all my favorite people to take this afternoon to center yourselves, connect with your loved ones," she shot a meaningful glance toward Jules and Rowan, "and prepare your hearts for all the love we'll be celebrating tomorrow." A murmur of approval circulated around the table. Across from Savvy, Danny caught Rowan's eye and gave a subtle eye roll that made her stifle a laugh. "Actually," Danny said, standing to join his fiancée, "I was thinking of checking out Shell Cove Path. The concierge mentioned it's pretty spectacular, especially now that they're setting up for the evening strolls. Anyone interested in joining?" Several people nodded, including Mateo's cousins and one of Savvy's work friends. Before Rowan had fully processed what she was doing, she raised her hand slightly. "I'd like to go," she said, surprising herself almost as much as Jules, whose head whipped around, eyebrows rising in question. "I could use the fresh air." Danny grinned. "Great, we'll meet in the lobby at 2. As breakfast wrapped up and people began dispersing, Rowan felt the small flamingo charm in her pocket, a tiny weight that somehow felt significant. Jules was deep in conversation with Savvy, their heads bent together as they consulted something on Jules' phone. Rowan slipped away without interrupting, heading back to their suite to change. Rowan had just finished applying sunscreen when Jules burst into the suite, slightly out of breath. "Hey," she said, hovering near the door. "Are you really going on that walk with Danny?" Rowan nodded, tucking her phone into her back pocket. "Thought I might. It'll be nice to see more of the resort grounds." Jules twisted her charm bracelet around her wrist, a nervous habit Rowan had noticed increasingly over the past 2 days. "Oh, that's... I was wondering if you wanted company. I mean, I know it's a group thing, but..." There was something in Jules' tone that set Rowan's defenses rising. A hint of that event planner voice, the one she used when smoothing over awkward situations or redirecting uncomfortable conversations. It was Jules in management mode, not Jules who had kissed her in the spa suite with unguarded hunger. "I think I'd prefer to go alone, actually," Rowan said, keeping her voice light, neutral. "Some thinking space might be good for both of us." A flicker of hurt crossed Jules' face before she masked it with a smile that didn't quite work. "Of course, totally get it. I've got some emails to catch up on anyway." The ease with which Jules accepted her refusal only confirmed what Rowan had been feeling since the vow workshop. Whatever moments of genuine connection they'd shared were being systematically walked back, filed away, rationalized out of existence. "I'll see you at dinner then?" Jules asked, already moving toward her laptop. "Sure," Rowan replied, slinging her small crossbody bag over her shoulder. She left without looking back, afraid of what her face might reveal if their eyes met again. Shell Cove Path lived up to its name, a winding trail lined with crushed shells that sparkled in the afternoon sun, curving along pristine beaches and through groves of palms and flowering shrubs. Resort staff were already placing candle lanterns at intervals along the path, preparing for the romantic evening strolls that were apparently a highlight for couples. Danny had been right. It was spectacular. The group had naturally splintered along the way, some stopping to take photos, others moving ahead at a faster pace. Rowan had gradually drifted away from the others, preferring solitude as the path curved around a series of small, secluded coves. She found herself alone on a stretch that hugged the shoreline, waves lapping at the sand just feet away. Stopping to take in the view, she reached into her pocket and pulled out the small flamingo charm, turning it over in her palm. The tiny bird caught the sunlight, its rose-gold plating gleaming against her skin. Jules added charms for milestones, Rowan knew that much. Each one marked something significant. Graduation, business launch, important trips. What milestone did this flamingo represent? This fake engagement weekend? Their pretend relationship? Or maybe something else entirely, something real that Jules hadn't shared. The sound of footsteps crunching on the shell path behind her made Rowan quickly close her hand around the charm. She turned to find Jules approaching, looking slightly out of breath, her hair windblown and cheeks flushed. She wore denim shorts and a loose white button-down with the sleeves rolled up, casual in a way that Rowan rarely saw her, and all the more striking for it. "Hi," Jules said, stopping a few feet away. I needed some air, too." The words hung between them, sounding almost like an apology. Rowan simply nodded, unsure what to say. Jules closed the distance between them, moving to stand beside her at the path's edge, looking out at the water. They stood in silence for several long moments, the only sounds the gentle wash of waves and distant seabirds calling. It wasn't a comfortable silence, exactly. Too many unspoken things crowded the space between them. But it wasn't the tense, brittle quiet of the morning either. Finally, Rowan opened her palm, revealing the charm she'd been holding. "You dropped this at breakfast," she said quietly, watching as Jules' eyes widened in recognition. "It fell off your bracelet." Jules' hand instinctively went to her wrist, fingers finding the spot where the charm had been attached. "Oh, I didn't even notice it was missing." She reached out hesitantly, as though afraid Rowan might snatch it away. "Thank you." Their fingers brushed as Jules took the flamingo, and Rowan fought the instinct to prolong the contact. "I add one for every important trip," Jules explained softly, examining the tiny bird. "It's stupid, but—" "It's not stupid," Rowan interrupted, the words coming out more forcefully than she'd intended. She softened her tone. "It's you. It's very Jules Everhart." Jules looked up, surprise and something warmer flickering across her face. "Is that a good thing or a bad thing?" "It's just a thing," Rowan replied with a small shrug. "You document everything. You always have. I remember you had color-coded folders for every debate topic, and you took pictures of all the whiteboards after study sessions." A smile tugged at Jules' lips. "I still have some of those photos." "Of course you do," Rowan said, unable to keep a note of fondness from her voice. Jules carefully reattached the charm to her bracelet, securing the clasp with focused attention. "There, back where it belongs." They resumed walking, falling into step beside each other as the path curved inland slightly, winding through a cluster of sea grape trees. The conversation shifted to safer topics. Savvy's last-minute change of floral arrangements, the weather forecast for tomorrow's ceremony, the spectacular sunset they'd likely see on their walk back. "I was worried when I couldn't find you in the suite," Jules admitted, breaking a brief lull in conversation. "I thought maybe, I don't know, that you'd decided to swim back to the mainland rather than endure another day of this. Rowan laughed despite herself. I considered it, but I left my shark repellent at home. Jules smiled, fidgeting with her bracelet again. She took a deep breath as though gathering courage. What did you write? In your vows yesterday? The question hung in the air between them, unexpected and direct. Jules kept her eyes fixed on the horizon rather than looking at Rowan's face. Rowan considered deflection. It would be easy enough to change the subject or offer a non-answer, but something about the moment, the privacy of this stretch of path, the gentle rhythm of the waves, Jules's uncharacteristic dishevelment, pushed her toward honesty. Or at least, a version of it. I wrote about respecting someone enough to believe them when they show you who they are, she said carefully, watching understanding dawn in Jules' expression. About how it's easier to build stories about people than to accept the reality of them, even when the reality might be better than the story. Jules stopped walking, turning to face her fully for the first time since their encounter on the path. Rowan, The rest of her sentence remained unspoken. They stood close enough now that Rowan could smell Jules' vanilla perfume, see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Rowan found herself holding her breath, waiting. Jules laughed suddenly, nervously, the spell broken. Oh my God, is that Elle wearing a pineapple hat? She pointed toward a figure farther down the path. The abrupt shift was like a bucket of cold water. Rowan took a deliberate step back, feeling her features settle into what Jules had once called her Ice Queen expression. Composed, distant, unreadable. She'd needed the reminder, apparently. No matter how real things sometimes felt between them, Jules would always choose deflection over vulnerability when it came to Rowan. We should head back, Rowan said, her voice neutral. It's almost time to get ready for dinner. Jules blinked, clearly registering the shift in Rowan's demeanor. Right. Yes. Of course. They walked back toward the resort in silence, the path between them wider than before, both physically and emotionally. The tiny flamingo charm caught the fading sunlight as Jules twisted her bracelet, reflecting warm light that no longer reached Rowan.
Chapter 11. The Almost Goodbye. Jules stabbed at her salad with more force than necessary as dinner conversations swirled around her. She'd spent 45 minutes positioning herself across the table from Rowan and mastering the art of never quite making eye contact. When she did accidentally catch Rowan's gaze, just once over the breadbasket, Jules manufactured a pleasant smile that belonged on a realtor's business card. "Are you feeling all right, Jules?" Savvy asked, reaching across the candlelit table to touch her arm. "You've barely touched your food." "Just a little headache," Jules lied, pressing fingertips to her temple. "I think it's the sun from this morning. We can't have our couple of the weekend champion down before the final scoring." Savvy's laugh was light, oblivious to the tension that had been building all day. "The bonfire starts in 20 minutes. S'mores and champagne, the perfect cure." Rowan lifted her water glass. "Sounds like quite the medical breakthrough." The easy charm in her voice made Jules' chest tighten. How could she sound so normal, so unaffected? Rowan sat there looking unfairly beautiful in that simple linen dress, making polite conversation with Danny about marine conservation, while Jules felt like she was drowning 3 feet away. Actually, Jules pushed her chair back with careful control. "I think I might skip the bonfire. Take some pain relievers and lie down for a bit." Savvy's face fell. "But the sunset toast." "I need Jules at her best for tomorrow," Rowan cut in smoothly, her gaze cool and professional when it landed on Jules. "Wedding days are marathons, not sprints." The casual way she referenced tomorrow, as if they still had a tomorrow, made something in Jules' chest crack. She nodded gratitude she didn't feel and made her excuses with practiced charm, promising to be fresh-faced for the beach ceremony. As she walked away, she heard Savvy ask Rowan if she wanted to head to the bonfire now, and Rowan's easy, "Sure, I'll grab us drinks," scraped against Jules' already raw nerves. Not once did Rowan suggest checking on her fiancé. So that's how it's going to be, Jules thought, her heels clicking rhythmically against the stone path back to their suite. Complete professional detachment. She could handle that. She'd spent a decade building walls around her feelings for Rowan. What was one more night? The door to the hibiscus suite swung open silently, and Jules stepped inside, already reaching for the light switch, then froze. The bedside lamp was already on, illuminating Rowan as she methodically folded a silk blouse and placed it in her open suitcase. Not just any blouse, the emerald green one she'd worn their first night here, the one Jules had complimented before she could stop herself. The suitcase sat open on the luggage rack, already half filled with neatly arranged clothes. On the dresser, Rowan's toiletries were lined up with military precision. Toothbrush, moisturizer, contact solution, no longer scattered across the bathroom counter, where they'd comfortably mingled with Jules' products just that morning. Jules stood motionless in the doorway. "What are you doing?" Her event planner voice, the one she used when caterers arrived late or DJ equipment malfunctioned, slipped as Rowan continued packing without looking up. "I couldn't sleep last night," Rowan said, her tone deliberately measured as she folded a pair of linen pants. "Too much on my mind, so I checked flights." She tucked socks into the corner of her suitcase. "There's one tomorrow at 1:30. I'll stay for the ceremony, of course, but I think it's best if I leave before the reception. Savvy will understand." Jules stepped fully into the room, letting the door swing shut behind her. She watched as Rowan picked up her cosmetics bag, then reached for the blue pen sitting on the nightstand. The one Jules now knew she used only for important decisions. The one that had been in her hand when she'd signed her first lease, accepted her scholarship, ended her last relationship. "Well?" Jules asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Rowan paused, the pen hovering over her bag. "I've fulfilled the contract requirements, haven't I? We've convinced everyone. We've secured our place in the couple of the weekend rankings. Mission accomplished." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Time to return to reality. "The wedding isn't even over," Jules said, her voice calmer than she felt. "We agreed to maintain appearances until after the reception. That was the deal." "Plans change." Rowan zipped her toiletry bag with a sharp, decisive sound. "I'll tell Savvy I have a work emergency. She knows how demanding my clients can be." "So, that's it?" Jules crossed to the dresser, blocking Rowan's path. "You're just going to disappear?" "I'm giving you 12 hours notice. That seems fair." Jules recognized this version of Rowan. Cool, detached, rational. It was the same tone she'd used in debate club when dismantling an opponent's argument. The same expression she'd worn when they'd competed for the Rosenberg Fellowship senior year. "This isn't about being fair," Jules said. "This is about finishing what we started." "What exactly did we start, Jules?" Rowan finally looked at her directly, and the careful neutrality in her eyes hurt more than anger would have, "because I'm not sure we're on the same page about that." The air between them felt charged, with all the things they weren't saying. Jules watched Rowan resume packing, meticulously arranging items as if the careful order could somehow contain the chaos between them. "You're running away," Jules said finally. "Like always." Rowan's hands stilled over her suitcase. "Excuse me?" "When things get complicated, you disappear," Jules gestured at the half-packed luggage. "You did it in college, too. Every time we got too close to something, you'd pull back." "That's rich, coming from you." Rowan's voice was soft but precise. "You don't get to write vows you don't mean. Kiss me when no one's watching, then pretend it's all still pretend, Jules." The words hit Jules like a physical blow. She began pacing the room, her carefully constructed control unraveling with each step. "I'm trying to protect us both. This was never supposed to be real." Her voice rose, despite her efforts to keep it level. "We had a clear agreement. Don't blame me because you got confused." Rowan went very still. "Confused," she repeated. the word clipped and tight. Is that what you think this is? I don't know what this is. Jules threw her hands up. All I know is that we had a plan, and now you're bailing in the middle of it, and I'm supposed to, what? Just handle the fallout while you run back to your real life? That's the problem. Rowan's response came with devastating quietness. Parts of it were real for me. The raw honesty in those words staggered Jules. She stopped pacing, her defense mechanisms faltering in the face of Rowan's vulnerability. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant sound of waves against the shore. I can't do this halfway anymore, Jules. Rowan's voice was steady despite the emotion behind it. I can't keep pretending to pretend. So yes, I'm leaving. Because staying here, dancing with you at the reception, playing the devoted fiancée for another 24 hours? She shook her head. I'm not that good an actress. Jules stared at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time all weekend. The shadows under her eyes, the tension in her shoulders, the careful way she was holding herself together. I've been using our rivalry as a shield since college, Jules said finally, her voice dropping to a whisper. I never hated you, Rowan. I was afraid of how much I didn't hate you. The admission hung between them, 10 years overdue. Rowan looked up, her expression guarded. What are you saying? I'm saying, Jules struggled to find words for the feelings she'd spent a decade suppressing. I'm saying the reason this weekend felt so confusing is because I kept forgetting we were pretending. She took a step toward Rowan. The way you laugh at my color-coding system but still remember how I organize my notes. The fact that you knew my coffee order from a decade ago. How you actually listened when I talked about my grandmother's charm bracelet. Her voice caught. Nobody pays that kind of attention to a... Silence stretched between them, heavy with a decade of missed chances. Jules crossed the room to where Rowan stood, gently taking the shirt from her hands and setting it aside before meeting her eyes with newfound courage. The vows were real, she admitted. The ones you found? They weren't a joke. Everything about this weekend became real for me, too. Rowan's breath hitched. Jules! I'm terrified, Jules continued, the words tumbling out now that she'd started. Because this isn't in my plan. I came here with checklists and emergency glitter pens and a fake fiancé. I was supposed to look successful and put together and instead, I'm standing here asking you not to leave tomorrow. The first touch was tentative, Jules' fingers brushing Rowan's cheek, tracing the contour of her jaw, before Rowan caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm that made Jules' breath catch. Stay, Jules whispered, please, not for the wedding, for me. Are you sure? Roland's voice was rough with emotion. Because if this is just about saving face at the reception... It's about what it should have been about 10 years ago, Jules interrupted. You, me. No rivalry, no pretending, no audience. Just us figuring out what we could be if we both stopped running. Rowan's answer came not in words, but in the gentle way she cupped Jules' face between her hands, searching her eyes for a long moment before leaning in to kiss her. Softly, carefully, as if Jules might change her mind. Jules responded with a decade of pent-up longing, her fingers threading through Rowan's hair as she pulled her closer. There were no cameras here, no wedding guests to impress, no scorecards to fill out. Just the quiet truth of what had always existed between them, finally acknowledged. What followed was a night of quiet discoveries. Rowan carefully unclasped Jules' charm bracelet, laying it on the nightstand with a tenderness that made Jules' heart ache. Jules traced the small book tattoo on Rowan's forearm, finally learning that it represented the first novel Rowan's grandmother had given her, the one that made her believe in possibilities beyond her working-class neighborhood. I spent years thinking you were everything I wasn't, Jules confessed, her head resting on Rowan's shoulder as they lay tangled together. Perfect, polished, always in control. Rowan's laugh was soft against her hair. I thought the same about you, Jules Everhart, with her color-coded life and her backup plans for her backup plans. We're quite the pair of idiots, aren't we? Highly educated idiots with exceptional taste in women, at least. Jules smiled against Rowan's skin, watching moonlight filter through the curtains. She'd spent her life planning for every contingency, but nothing had prepared her for this. The quiet contentment of lying beside Rowan with no barrier of pillows between them, no pretense required. Jules. Rowan's voice was drowsy. If I unpack my suitcase, what happens after the wedding? The question was laden with all the practical complications they hadn't addressed. Different cities, demanding careers, a relationship built on old rivalry and new vulnerability. I don't know exactly, Jules admitted, surprising herself with how little that uncertainty bothered her. But I think we start by booking you a later flight, and then maybe weekend visits, alternating cities until we figure things out? She felt Rowan nod. I can work with that. I'm very good at optimizing travel schedules. And I'm exceptional at long-term planning, Jules replied, pressing a kiss to Rowan's shoulder. Though I might need to create a new color code for this. As Rowan's breathing deepened into sleep, Jules lay awake watching her, memorizing the peaceful expression that had replaced the guarded look she'd worn for days. She whispered her real vows into the darkness, promises of patience, honesty, and second chances, aware that tomorrow still held uncertainty, but no longer afraid to face it with her heart exposed. For once in her life, Jules had no checklist, no 5-year plan, no color-coded strategy for what came next, but she had Rowan's blue pen on the nightstand and her warmth against her side, and somehow that felt like enough.
Chapter 12. The Real Question. Rowan stared at her reflection in the bathroom mirror, meticulously adding the final touches to her makeup. Her hair fell in soft waves around her face, and she'd chosen her outfit with careful precision. A sleek jumpsuit in a soft sage that brought out the gold flecks in her hazel eyes. Perfect for a wedding. Perfect for the end of whatever this weekend had been. Her fingers drifted to her collarbone, tracing the exact path where Jules' fingertips had traveled just hours before. The ghost of that touch lingered on her skin, a phantom sensation that made her breath catch. Last night felt simultaneously like a beautiful conclusion and something dangerously close to a beginning. 5 minutes till breakfast, Jules called from the other room, her voice carrying the same professional cheerfulness she used with clients. Rowan swallowed hard. Almost ready. They'd woken up tangled together, Jules' head tucked against her shoulder, but the morning light had brought careful distance. Neither had mentioned the whispered confessions, the tender touches, the way they'd finally crossed the line they'd been dancing around for years. It was just one night, Rowan reminded her reflection, straightening her shoulders. One perfect, heartbreaking night that would have to last her a lifetime. Breakfast at the Flamingo Terrace buzzed with pre-wedding excitement. The wedding party sat at a long table beneath strings of fairy lights and tropical flowers, everyone talking over each other with the easy camaraderie that came from a weekend of shared celebrations. Mimosa? Mateo offered, appearing beside Rowan with 2 glasses. God, yes, she said, taking one gratefully. She slid into her seat beside Jules, who was deep in conversation with Savvy about last-minute wedding details. Jules's brow was furrowed slightly, that planning face Rowan had always found secretly endearing. The florist confirmed they'll be at the pavilion by 9, Jules was saying, glancing at her ever-present phone. And I double-checked with the string quartet. Savvy beamed. What would I do without you? Probably hire an actual wedding planner instead of exploiting your friend, Rowan offered with a dry smile that made Savvy laugh. Exploiting with love, Savvy corrected, reaching across to squeeze Jules' hand. Jules turned to Rowan then, her professional smile softening into something more genuine. Sleep okay? She asked, voice pitched low for just the 2 of them. Fine, Rowan lied, because what else could she say? That she'd barely slept at all, too aware of Jules' warmth beside her, too afraid to reach for her in the darkness? that she'd memorized the rhythm of Jules' breathing, storing it away for lonely nights to come? Under the table, Jules' hand found hers, fingers sliding between Rowan's with a gentle pressure that felt nothing like their practiced couple routine. This touch wasn't for show. No one could see it beneath the tablecloth. It felt more like a question, tentative and unsure. Rowan squeezed back reflexively before she could think better of it. Jules' thumb traced small circles on Rowan's palm, and for a moment they just sat there, connected beneath the surface while maintaining perfect composure above. "So," Matteo called out, raising his glass, "to our beautiful bride and groom, may today be everything you've planned for, and may all your days together be even better than you can imagine." Everyone clinked glasses, the moment broken. Jules withdrew her hand to join the toast, and Rowan felt the loss like a physical thing. "You two are next," Savvy said, pointing at Jules and Rowan with a grin. "I expect to be maid of honor, by the way. It's only fair." Rowan forced a laugh, the practiced kind she'd perfected over the weekend. "We'll see." Her gaze met Jules's across their mimosas, and something complicated passed between them. The weight of last night, the reality of tomorrow. The Pearl Pavilion glowed in the morning sunlight, transformed into a fairy tale setting with white chairs in perfect rows facing the ocean. White linen curtains billowed softly in the sea breeze, and flower petals created a path toward an arch draped in hibiscus and plumeria. Rowan sat slightly apart from the gathering crowd, watching as wedding guests took photos and exchanged stories. She'd arrived early, needing space to collect herself, before rejoining the performance. Her suitcase was already half-packed back in the room, her departure planned for the earliest possible flight tomorrow morning. The memory of Jules's whispered confessions in the darkness played through her mind. "I've never hated you, not even close. I think that terrified me more than anything." Words spoken against Rowan's skin, in the safety of darkness, when neither of them had to face what they meant in the light of day. Did confessions survive sunrise? Or were they like dreams, vivid in the moment but fading with consciousness? Rowan checked her watch. 20 minutes until the ceremony. She'd need to find Jules soon, resume their charade for the day's main event. "Mind if I join you?" Rowan looked up to find Danny standing beside her bench, looking relaxed and happy in his wedding suit. For a man hours away from the biggest commitment of his life, he seemed remarkably calm. "Be my guest," she said, sliding over. Danny settled beside her, loosening his tie slightly. "Needed a momentary escape from the madness," he admitted. "Savvy's got 14 cousins taking group photos, and I figured I wasn't essential personnel for that operation." Rowan laughed. "Smart man." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the gathering guests from their relative sanctuary. Danny had always been easy to be around, steady where Savvy was exuberant, thoughtful where she was impulsive. They balanced each other perfectly. "You know," he said after a while, "some people spend their whole lives looking for someone who challenges them the way Jules challenges you." Rowan's head snapped toward him, her carefully constructed composure slipping. "What?" Danny shrugged, squinting against the sunlight. "I've been watching you two all weekend. It's not just the bickering or the competition, though that's entertaining as hell. It's how you both light up. How you're always aware of each other, even across a crowded room." Rowan struggled to find words, unnerved by how transparent they'd apparently been. "It's complicated." "The best things usually are." Danny adjusted his boutonniere. "Savvy told me about your college days, how you two would argue for hours about the most ridiculous things." "Jules has always been infuriatingly stubborn," Rowan said, the fondness in her voice betraying her. "You know why Savvy was so fixated on you two coming to the wedding together?" Danny asked, a slight smile playing at his lips. "She's had a bet going with Matteo since senior year that you'd end up together." Rowan blinked. "You're joking." "Nope. $20 and eternal bragging rights. She's been insufferable about it all weekend." He stood, straightening his jacket. "Just thought you should know." As he walked away, Rowan sat frozen, trying to process this new information. Had everyone seen something she and Jules had been so determined to deny? The ceremony was starting. Rowan found herself seated in the front row beside Jules, suddenly hyper-aware of her presence, the brush of her arm against Rowan's, the faint scent of vanilla perfume, the way the sunlight caught in her hair. Jules had styled it in loose curls that framed her face, and Rowan had to fight the urge to reach out and touch one. The string quartet began playing, and conversation hushed. Jules shifted in her seat, her knee briefly pressing against Rowan's before moving away. The small point of contact burned. "Perfect weather," Jules whispered, her professional voice tinged with genuine joy for her friend. "Savvy really lucked out." "She did," Rowan agreed, though she wasn't looking at the sky. The procession began, bridesmaids in soft coral dresses walking the petal-strewn aisle. When Danny took his place beneath the arch, his face radiant with anticipation, Rowan felt something twist in her chest. She'd never allowed herself to want this, had convinced herself that professional success was enough, that relationships were just complications to avoid. Last night had shattered that carefully constructed lie. A collective sigh rose from the guests as Savvy appeared, radiant in ivory lace. Beside her, Jules discreetly wiped at her eyes, her composure momentarily forgotten. Without thinking, Rowan reached over, offering a tissue she'd tucked into her clutch. Jules took it, her fingers brushing Rowan's, a grateful smile lighting her face. "Always prepared," she whispered. "Some of us has to be," Rowan whispered back. As Savvy joined Danny beneath the arch, their faces reflecting a joy so pure it was almost painful to witness, Rowan allowed herself a dangerous moment of imagination, what it might be like to stand across from Jules like that, making promises they actually intended to keep. "I promise to challenge you, support you, and laugh with you," Danny said, his voice carrying clearly across the hushed pavilion. "To be your partner in adventure and your comfort in difficult times." "I promise to love your calm as much as you love my chaos," Savvy responded, earning gentle laughter from the guests. "To build a life of joy and purpose, to face whatever comes. Together." As they exchanged vows, Rowan couldn't help but compare their honest declarations to the mock vows she and Jules had written, and the real ones they'd never shared. She glanced at Jules, who was watching the ceremony with rapt attention, her fingers absently touching her charm bracelet, where the small flamingo now hung alongside years of memories. Rowan remembered the vows she'd actually written, the ones she'd hidden from Jules, the ones that had felt too real, too raw to share even in the context of their game. "I promise to see beyond your perfect smile, to the insecurities beneath, to challenge you when you need it, and support you always. To remember that behind every color-coded plan is a heart that feels too much. I promise to be honest when it matters most, even when the truth terrifies me." The officiant pronounced Danny and Savvy married, and applause erupted around them. Jules clapped enthusiastically beside her, genuine happiness for her friend shining through. "They look so happy," Jules whispered, a catch in her voice. "They do," Rowan agreed, wondering how many people found this certainty, this courage to choose someone every day. As the newlyweds processed back up the aisle amid cheers and tossed flower petals, Jules turned to Rowan with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "One more event to go," she said, an acknowledgement that their time together was rapidly drawing to a close. Rowan nodded, ignoring the ache in her chest. "Almost done." The reception on the Flamingo Terrace sparkled with fairy lights and laughter. Dinner had been served, toasts made, and now guests mingled freely, some dancing to the band's upbeat music, others gathered in conversation clusters around the perimeter. Rowan moved through it all on autopilot, accepting congratulations on her engagement, smiling at the right moments, laughing at the right jokes. Her suitcase was still half-packed in their room, her early flight confirmation a weight in her pocket, reality pressing in as the fantasy of the weekend prepared to dissolve. Across the room, Jules charmed a circle of Savvy's relatives, her animated gestures punctuating whatever story she was telling. She looked beautiful, the soft lighting catching the gold undertones in her chestnut hair, her green eyes bright with laughter, simultaneously so familiar and still such a mystery. "Earth to Rowan," Mateo said, appearing at her elbow with 2 champagne flutes. "You're staring." She accepted the champagne with a wry smile. "Just taking it all in." "Mm-hmm." He clinked his glass against hers. "So, you flying out tomorrow?" "Early," she confirmed. "Work doesn't stop for wedding magic." "And Jules?" Rowan took a sip, the bubbles sharp against her tongue. "I'm not her keeper, Mateo." He raised an eyebrow. "Could have fooled me. You two have been joined at the hip all weekend." "That was just—" Rowan stopped herself. What was the point in maintaining the lie now? In less than 24 hours they'd be back to their separate lives. The bubble of Coral Haven Resort, nothing but a memory. "Complicated?" Mateo supplied, echoing her earlier word with Danny. "Something like that." Mateo glanced at his watch, then grinned. "Stick around for another 10 minutes. I've got a little surprise for the festivities." Before she could question him, he was gone, weaving through the crowd toward the small stage where the band was taking a break. With a growing sense of dread, Rowan watched him take the microphone, tapping it twice to get everyone's attention. "Ladies, gentlemen, and distinguished guests," Mateo announced, his voice carrying across the terrace. "It's time for the moment you've all been waiting for. The announcement of our Couple of the Weekend award." A cheer went up from the wedding guests. Rowan scanned the crowd for Jules and found her already moving toward her, a professional smile fixed firmly in place. "Ready for our final performance?" Jules murmured as she reached Rowan's side, linking their arms in their practiced couple pose. Rowan nodded, mentally preparing to maintain their charade for just a few minutes longer before making her quiet exit. They'd discussed it that morning. They would accept the prize graciously, make their excuses early, and say goodnight to the fantasy they'd created. "Over the past 3 days," Mateo continued, "our couples have competed in everything from trivia to mixology to dance-offs. The points have been tallied, the judges have decided, and I'm pleased to announce that this year's Couple of the Weekend is—" He paused dramatically and Rowan found herself holding her breath. "Jules and Rowan." Genuine surprise registered on both their faces as applause erupted around them. Jules recovered first, her event planner smile widening as she squeezed Rowan's arm, guiding her forward toward the stage. "Did you know about this?" Rowan whispered as they made their way through the congratulating crowd. "No idea," Jules whispered back. "I thought we tanked the trivia night." "Must have been the dance-off," Rowan said, remembering how Jules had laughed, truly laughed as they'd spun around the terrace to an old 90s pop hit. They climbed the steps to join Mateo on stage, accepting the certificate he presented with a flourish. "A free weekend stay at Coral Haven Resort," he announced, "for whenever you two lovebirds want to return to the scene of your romantic weekend." A prize for a future that might not exist. Rowan accepted the certificate, feeling the glossy paper between her fingers as she tried to formulate an appropriate thank you speech. But as she stood under the spotlight, certificate in hand, she found herself looking at Jules. Really looking at her. Seeing beyond the perfect event planner smile to the woman who had whispered secrets against her skin last night. The woman who challenged her, frustrated her, fascinated her. The woman who had never hated her. In that moment, something shifted inside Rowan, a decision that terrified and exhilarated her in equal measure. She was tired of pretending, tired of hiding, tired of letting fear dictate her choices. She took the microphone from Mateo, her hand surprisingly steady despite her racing heart. "Thank you all," she began, her voice clear in the night air. "This weekend has been unexpected in so many ways." The crowd chuckled appreciatively. Beside her, Jules smiled, clearly expecting their standard comedy routine. "Everyone thinks we're the perfect couple," Rowan continued, turning to face Jules directly. "But the truth is, we've been pretending." Jules' smile froze, her eyes widening in alarm. A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "Pretending to be engaged," Rowan said, her voice steady despite the thundering of her heart. Pretending to hate each other for years. She took a breath, feeling like she was stepping off a cliff. Pretending we're not falling in love. The terrace went absolutely silent. Jules stared at her, shock written across her features. "What if we stopped pretending, Jules?" Rowan asked, the question hanging in the air between them. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Rowan stood vulnerable and exposed. She was vaguely aware of Savvy clutching Danny's arm, of Mateo's delighted expression, but her focus remained entirely on Jules, watching emotions cascade across her face. Shock, fear, and something that looked remarkably like hope. For one terrible moment, Jules said nothing, and Rowan felt the weight of her gamble. Had she misread everything? Had last night meant something different to Jules? Then Jules stepped forward, closing the space between them, her green eyes bright with unshed tears and something else, a certainty Rowan had never seen there before. "I'm tired of pretending too," Jules said, her voice soft but clear enough for those closest to hear. "I'm tired of pretending I don't think about you all the time, that I haven't been comparing everyone I've ever dated to you, that last night wasn't the most real I've felt in years." Rowan's breath caught. "Jules?" "Yes," Jules said simply. "Yes to stopping the pretense. Yes to whatever comes next. Yes to you, Rowan. It's always been you." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in a bubble of honesty after years of calculated distance. Rowan reached out, her fingers finding Jules' charm bracelet, touching the tiny flamingo charm that had somehow become a symbol of everything unsaid between them. "I don't have a ring," Rowan said with a small, wry smile. "But, I promise, if you'll have me, I'll get you one that doesn't come from a gift shop." Jules laughed then, the sound bright and real, her hand coming up to cup Rowan's cheek. "I don't need a ring," she said. "I just need you to keep challenging me, keep seeing me, keep being you." Around them, the crowd had begun to realize what they were witnessing. Not a scripted moment, but something authentic unfolding in real time. A smattering of applause started, growing louder as Jules leaned in, erasing the last bit of space between them. This kiss wasn't like the practiced ones they'd shared for show, or even like the desperate ones from last night. It was a beginning, a promise, a truth. When they finally broke apart, Rowan rested her forehead against Jules's, uncaring of their audience, of the spectacle they'd created. "We're going to have to explain this to everyone," Jules whispered, a laugh bubbling in her voice. Rowan smiled, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I think they figured it out before we did."
Chapter 13. The Last Charm. Jules stood alone in the hibiscus suite, fingers trembling slightly as she opened the small package she'd secretly purchased from the resort gift shop earlier that day. The tissue paper crinkled as she unwrapped a tiny silver heart charm and a delicate hibiscus flower, symbols of what this week had unexpectedly become. She held them in her palm, their weight almost nothing, yet somehow they felt like the heaviest, most significant items she'd ever bought. "This wasn't on the itinerary," she whispered to herself, a smile tugging at her lips. The air conditioning hummed quietly in the background as she moved to the dresser where her charm bracelet lay. The gold links caught the late afternoon light that streamed through the partially open curtains. Jules ran her finger along the charms that had marked her life's milestones: the tiny graduation cap from college, the miniature passport for her first international business trip, the small laptop that commemorated launching her own company, practical symbols of achievement and forward momentum. And then the little flamingo charm, the one she'd almost lost, the one Rowan had rescued and returned. The one that now meant something entirely different. With practiced fingers, Jules clasped the new charms onto her bracelet alongside the flamingo. The delicate clink of metal against metal seemed too ordinary a sound for such a monumental moment. She fastened the bracelet around her wrist and caught her reflection in the mirror. Her perfect wedding guest outfit was slightly rumpled, hair coming loose from its careful styling. For once, She didn't immediately fix it. The imperfection felt right, somehow, like proof that something real had happened here, something unplanned and wonderfully messy. "You actually look like a human being," she told her reflection, and laughed softly. "Not bad, Jules." Rowan's words from the reception stage played on loop in her mind. What if we stopped pretending? The simple question had cracked something open inside her, something that had been sealed tight for years. Jules had expected to feel terrified when the facades fell away, but instead, she'd felt nothing but relief, like finally exhaling after holding her breath for far too long. Turning away from the mirror, Jules moved to the balcony and looked out at the resort grounds below. Guests in formal wear milled about, many heading back to their rooms to change before the evening after-party. A few were already in casual clothes, drinks in hand, laughing together near the pool. She touched each charm on her bracelet chronologically. Academic achievements, career milestones, travels. Each one had a story, each one carefully selected to commemorate a step forward in her meticulously planned life. It struck her suddenly that for all her obsessive life documentation, she'd never had a charm that simply meant falling in love. "Because you can't schedule something like that," she murmured, fingering the new heart charm. "Can't put it in a color-coded planner between breakfast meeting and quarterly review." Her phone vibrated on the nightstand, probably Carmen, wanting details. Jules left it there. For once, the play-by-play could wait. The story wouldn't fit in text messages anyway. After one last glance at the room, the rumpled sheets from the previous night, the 2 coffee cups on the table, the intermingled toiletries in the bathroom, Jules grabbed her room key and stepped out. She needed to find Rowan. Jules walked through the resort grounds as evening approached, nodding at wedding guests who gave her knowing smiles after Rowan's declaration, and her own tearful, "Yes, let's stop pretending," response. A group of Savvy's cousins raised their glasses to her as she passed the pool bar. Mateo's grandmother winked at her near the lobby. "Congratulations, dear," called an elderly aunt whose name Jules couldn't remember. "Such a romantic proposal." Jules smiled and thanked her, appreciating how the weight of performance had lifted from her shoulders. Before, each interaction had been a calculation. How much to touch Rowan, when to laugh at her jokes, how to stand just close enough to look like a couple. Now she moved through the resort without a script, and it felt like breathing fresh air after being underwater. Near the garden path, she ran into Carmen, who immediately pulled her into a fierce hug. "You absolute disaster," Carmen said, her voice muffled against Jules' shoulder. "Only you would fake an engagement and end up actually falling in love." Jules pulled back, laughing. "I had it under control the whole time." "Bullshit," Carmen replied cheerfully. "You were spiraling. I have the text receipts." "Fine, total disaster," Jules conceded. "But a happy one?" Carmen studied her face. Yeah, I think so. You look less twitchy." High praise. "For you, it is," Carmen glanced around. "Where's your not-fake fiancé now?" Jules shrugged. "That's what I'm trying to figure out. She needed some space after everything. The public confession, the standing ovation, Talia's face turning the exact shade of her bridesmaid dress." Carmen grinned. "All of it." Jules twisted her bracelet nervously. "We haven't really talked since the reception, like, actually talked. About what happens next." Carmen squeezed her arm. "You'll figure it out. Just maybe try using actual words this time instead of 5 years of competitive snark followed by a fake engagement." "Revolutionary approach," Jules said dryly. She spotted the entrance to Shell Cove Path, now lit with paper lanterns for evening strolling. "I think I know where she might be." Carmen stepped back. "Go get her, overachiever Barbie." "Don't call me that," Jules called over her shoulder, already walking toward the path. "You love it," Carmen shouted after her. And the thing was, she kinda did. Shell Cove Path looked different in the evening light. The lanterns cast a warm, honeyed glow over the white sand, and the crashing waves provided a steady soundtrack that seemed both soothing and momentous. Jules followed the winding trail, remembering how she'd deflected Rowan's sincerity here days before. A pattern of self-protection she was finally ready to break. She'd spent years building a life that looked perfect from the outside. Achievements, accolades, appearances. And somewhere along the way, she'd forgotten that the point of all this planning and striving was supposed to be happiness. Not the kind that photographed well for Instagram, but the kind that made her feel alive. Rowan had always seen through the performance. Even in college, when Jules would stay up all night perfecting a presentation, Rowan would walk into class with coffee-stained notes and somehow nail every point with a natural eloquence that Jules both resented and admired. Rowan never seemed to care about the packaging, only the substance. Maybe that's why pretending with Rowan had felt so impossible, and why stopping the pretense felt so necessary. At the path's end, Jules spotted Rowan sitting alone on the beach, silhouette outlined against the sunset. She looked more peaceful than she'd seemed all weekend. No longer the calculated rival or the reluctant fake fiancé, just Rowan waiting by the water. Jules approached quietly, slipping off her shoes to feel sand between her toes, deliberately messing up her perfect pedicure as she joined Rowan on the sand. A small act of choosing authenticity over appearance that felt surprisingly significant. The sand was still warm from the day's sun, and it squeezed between her toes in a way that felt both grounding and liberating. "I canceled my flight," Rowan said without turning, her gaze still fixed on the horizon where the sun was melting into the ocean. Jules responded by simply taking her hand, their fingers interlacing naturally now, without an audience to perform for. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than charged. They sat like that for several minutes, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "Did you know," Rowan said eventually, "that I almost asked you out our senior year?" Jules turned to look at her in surprise. "What? When?" "Beats Alive debate tournament in Chicago. The one where we stayed up all night preparing counter-arguments and ended up eating terrible frozen pizza at 3 a.m. Rowan smiled at the memory. "You had sauce on your chin, and you were talking about logical fallacies like they were the most fascinating things in the universe. And that made you want to date me?" Jules asked, incredulous. "It made me realize you were the only person who cared about things as deeply as I did." Rowan shrugged. "But then you got that internship I'd applied for, and I convinced myself you'd manipulated the whole thing." Jules winced. "I didn't know you'd applied." "I know that now," Rowan said softly. "But back then, it was easier to think you were calculating everything than to admit I had feelings for someone who probably saw me as nothing but competition." Jules showed Rowan her bracelet with its new additions, the silver catching the last light of day. "I've spent my whole life documenting accomplishments. Perfect grades, perfect career moves, perfect trips." She ran her thumb over the heart charm. "I never had a charm for something beautifully imperfect until now." Rowan touched the hibiscus flower charm gently. "Our sweet." "Where it all started," Jules hesitated, "or technically restarted." "So this is real," Rowan said. "Not quite a question." "As real as it gets," Jules looked down at their joined hands. "I'm not very good at real. I like schedules and certainties and knowing exactly what's going to happen next. But with you, with me, the schedule goes out the window," Rowan finished, a smile in her voice. "Completely," Jules agreed, "and it terrifies me, and I love it." "You love being terrified?" Rowan raised an eyebrow. "I love feeling something true," Jules turned to face her fully. "I've spent so long planning my happiness for the future that I forgot to notice when it was happening in the present." Their conversation became quiet and honest, no grand declarations or elaborate promises, just practical discussions of different cities, work schedules, and the logistics of dating for real. Jules' event planning nature emerged, not to control, but to problem-solve together. "You're in San Francisco, I'm in Portland," Jules said, mentally calculating distances and flight times. "That's what, an hour-and-a-half flight? And neither of us has a reliable schedule," Rowan added. "I travel for client meetings, you disappear into event black holes for weeks at a time." "We'd need to be intentional about it," Jules nodded, already thinking of shared calendar apps. "Set aside weekends. Maybe work remotely sometimes." "You're already planning our relationship down to the minute, aren't you?" Rowan asked, but there was affection in her teasing. "Old habits," Jules admitted. "But I'm open to improvising." Rowan laughed. "That might be the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." As twilight deepened around them, the stars emerging one by one above the ocean, Jules found herself laughing at how they had come full circle, from academic rivals to fake fiancés to whatever this new beginning was, with Rowan observing dryly that they'd taken the most complicated possible route to a first date. "We could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble if we'd just swiped right on each other's dating profiles," Jules agreed. "Where's the drama in that?" Rowan bumped her shoulder lightly. "Besides, would you have matched with me? Your profile probably specified no academic rivals and must love color coding. And yours probably said seeking someone who doesn't make to-do lists for breakfast," Jules shot back. "Must appreciate the beauty of spontaneity and mismatched socks," Rowan nodded solemnly. "God, we would have been terrible for each other 5 years ago," Jules realized. "Probably," Rowan agreed. "Maybe we needed the time apart to become people who could be good for each other." Jules thought about that, about how the years had softened some of her sharp edges and taught her that perfection wasn't the same as happiness, about how Rowan seemed more grounded now, less driven by the chip on her shoulder and more by genuine passion for her work. "So what now?" Jules asked, surprising herself with the question. Usually she was the one with the next steps all mapped out. "Now," Rowan said, "we do what normal people do. We date. We get to know each other. The real versions, not the competitive college kids or the fake engaged couple." "That sounds..." Jules searched for the right word. "Simple." "Terrified?" Rowan teased. "A little," Jules admitted, "but the good kind." The distant sounds of music from the wedding reception floated down to the beach. Savvy and Mateo's celebration continuing without them, which felt right somehow. This moment belonged just to the two of them. When they kissed, there was no audience cheering, no competition to win, no pretense to maintain. Just the gentle crash of waves and the quiet certainty that after years of rivalry and days of pretending, they'd finally found something real in each other. Perfectly imperfect and entirely their own. Rowan's lips were soft against hers, one hand coming up to cup Jules' face with a tenderness that made her chest ache. This kiss wasn't for show, wasn't calculated or performed. It was just them, finally honest with each other and themselves. When they broke apart, Jules rested her forehead against Rowan's. "That wasn't in the script?" "Good," Rowan whispered. "I'm tired of scripts." Jules looked at her, at the woman who had challenged and infuriated and fascinated her for years, and felt a certainty settle into her bones. Whatever came next would be complicated and imperfect, and probably nothing like she'd planned. And for once, that sounded exactly right.
Epilogue, the soft launch. Rowan woke to a beam of sunlight sliding across her face, momentarily disorienting her until she registered the weight of Jules' arm draped across her waist. She blinked away sleep, taking in the familiar yet still new surroundings of Jules' bedroom. Their bedroom now, technically, though the thought still gave her a small thrill of disbelief. Morning light filtered through the pale blue curtains they'd spent an entire Saturday debating before finally compromising on. "They're not quite cerulean, but not quite periwinkle either," Jules had insisted, as if this mattered. On the nightstand, Jules' charm bracelet caught stray sunbeams, twinkling beside the neat row of Rowan's pens, one blue, one black, meticulously arranged in a small ceramic holder Jules had bought specifically for them. Rowan had pretended to find the gesture ridiculous. Who needed a designated pen holder? But secretly appreciated how Jules created space for her things without being asked. She carefully extracted herself from Jules' grasp, smiling at the small sound of protest this elicited. 3 months after Coral Haven, and she still couldn't quite believe this was her life now, that Jules Everhart, overachieving, color-coding former academic nemesis, Jules, was the person she woke up beside. The shower started running in the bathroom. Rowan reached for her phone, scrolling to the album from their Pacific Northwest trip last week. The vacation had been their redemption of the couple of the weekend prize, though they'd modified it significantly. Instead of the original spa weekend, they'd opted for a remote cabin in the Olympic Peninsula. Rowan swiped through photos, grinning at one particularly ridiculous shot of Jules hiking in what could only be described as performatively outdoorsy boots. Impossibly cute and wholly impractical. Another showed them rain-soaked under a single umbrella, Jules' nose scrunched up as Rowan kissed her cheek. Then there was the sunset from their cabin porch, all pink and gold streaks against silhouetted trees. A view they'd barely appreciated because they'd spent most of those 3 days tangled up in each other. Looking at vacation porn? Jules padded into the bedroom wrapped in a towel, hair dripping onto her shoulders. Just reminiscing about your hiking outfit. I'm still not convinced those were actual boots and not fashion props. Jules flicked water at her. They were functional Madewell ankle boots, thank you very much. You complained the entire hike. The reviews said they were hiking appropriate. Jules disappeared into her walk-in closet. We're meeting Carmen in 40 minutes, by the way. I think we should leave in 20 to account for Saturday parking chaos. Rowan set her phone aside. Yes, ma'am, she said dryly, though she was already mentally adjusting her morning routine to fit the timeline. Jules had rubbed off on her more than she cared to admit. In the kitchen, their domestic rhythm unfolded with a quiet efficiency that still surprised Rowan. Jules emerged wearing a sundress and denim jacket, hair twisted into a messy bun, already listing their afternoon options with cheerful precision. Meanwhile, Rowan moved through the coffee-making ritual, grinding beans, heating water to exactly 203 degrees, measuring oat milk with scientific accuracy. Jules liked her coffee one specific way: medium roast, oat milk, not almond, never dairy, a sprinkle of cinnamon, no foam. It had taken Rowan 3 attempts to perfect, the learning curve steep but oddly satisfying. We could hit the farmer's market after brunch, then maybe that new bookstore on Grant? Jules tapped notes into her phone. Unless you want to start sorting through your books for the move. Rowan handed over the finished coffee. Tempt me with books only to suggest organizing? That's emotional manipulation. Jules grinned over the rim of her mug. Fine. Bookstore first, then maybe just a preliminary book assessment. Your strategic concession is noted. Rowan kissed her temple. Also, I'll need at least 2 hours at the bookstore, for scientific purposes. Of course. Very scientific. Jules took another sip, eyes closing briefly in satisfaction. Perfect, as always. Something warm bloomed in Rowan's chest at the simple praise. 3 months ago, neither of them had known the other took coffee, much less how they preferred it. Now, these small details, the specific sound Jules made when tasting something delicious, the way she organized her closet by color and function, how she secretly watched baking shows when stressed, felt like privileged knowledge. The maple fork occupied a converted Victorian on a corner lot, all exposed brick and mismatched vintage furniture. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed the ceiling, regardless of season, and a pride flag hung prominently in the front window, paired with a hand-lettered sign announcing drag brunch every 3rd Sunday. The place hummed with weekend energy, laptop warriors guarding tables, couples lingering over shared plates, friends loudly recapping Friday night. Rowan watched as Jules scanned the room, unconsciously fiddling with the hibiscus charm on her bracelet, a habit that emerged whenever she was nervous. After a moment, Jules' shoulders relaxed. I don't see her yet. Maybe we beat Carmen for once. Would that even be Carmen if she arrived on time? Rowan asked, remembering the countless stories Jules had shared about her chronically late business partner. Joel, over here. They both turned toward the dramatic wave and unmistakable voice cutting through the brunch chatter. Carmen Duval, looking effortlessly put together in a jumpsuit and statement earrings, bounced up from a corner booth. Before Rowan could properly prepare, Carmen had bypassed her completely and swept Jules into an enthusiastic hug that lifted her slightly off the ground. You're late, which means I had to defend this prime booth from 3 different groups of tech bros, Carmen said, finally releasing Jules. Her attention shifted to Rowan, giving her a slow, appraising once-over. And you must be the nemesis-turned-girlfriend I've heard way too much about for literally years. Rowan raised an eyebrow, glancing at Jules, whose cheeks had turned an alarming shade of pink. Years, huh? Oh my God, stop, Jules covered her face. It's been 3 months. Yeah, 3 months of you talking about her. The 7 years before that were all Rowan this, and the Ice Queen that. And can you believe what she said in macro? Carmen winked at Rowan. Nice to finally meet the infamous competition. Likewise, Rowan replied, extending her hand. I've heard equally colorful stories. Carmen bypassed the handshake for a quick hug. We're way past formalities, Ivy League. You're sleeping with my best friend. That makes us automatically in each other's lives forever. Jules made a strangled noise. Can we please sit down before you traumatize everyone further? They slid into the booth, Jules and Rowan on one side, Carmen opposite. A server appeared almost immediately, offering mimosa flights and taking their orders. Carmen launched into interrogation mode before they'd even received their drinks. So when did fake become real? Because Jules was very insistent this was a strictly professional arrangement. Carmen leaned forward, chin propped on her hand. Until suddenly it wasn't. Rowan couldn't help the amused twitch of her lips. Does giving a heartfelt confession during someone else's wedding reception count as professional? You gave the confession, Jules protested. I just stood there, paralyzed. Until you tackled me with your face. I did not tackle, I reciprocated with enthusiasm. Carmen's gaze bounced between them, delighted. God, you're already an old married couple. Who kissed who first, though? The real first time? Rowan and Jules exchanged a glance. Depends how you count, Jules hedged. There was a strategic public kiss, Rowan started. For believability purposes. Which was technically initiated by Jules. But the first real kiss was after the spa. Which I initiated, Rowan finished. Carmen observed them with undisguised fascination. Are you always this disgustingly cute, or is this for my benefit? We're not cute, we're... Jules began. Accurate, Rowan supplied. Their mimosa flight arrived classic, blood orange, grapefruit, and something involving lavender, along with a tower of challah French toast for the table. Conversation paused as they served themselves, but Carmen was undeterred for long. I want the real story, she declared, pouring maple syrup with alarming generosity. How you two actually reconnected. Because the last update I got from Jules was, we're definitely not real engaged, but we might have accidentally slept together. Carmen! Jules choked on her mimosa. Rowan felt her own face warm, but couldn't help admiring Carmen's direct approach. She caught Jules's eye, silently communicating. Jules gave a small nod. Well, Rowan began, it started with Jules manipulating me into her ridiculous scheme. Excuse me? Jules interrupted. It started with you agreeing to said scheme with suspicious enthusiasm. I was being charitable. You were being competitive, says the woman who created color-coded flashcards for our fake relationship. Jules pointed her fork accusingly. Which you memorized. Because I'm thorough, not because I was invested. You knew my coffee order from 7 years ago. You kept a detailed spreadsheet of my debate statistics. Carmen's head swiveled between them like a tennis match spectator. Oh my God, you two are still rivals, she declared. Just horizontal ones now. Jules buried her face in her hands while Rowan couldn't suppress a laugh. "That's actually not inaccurate," Rowan admitted. "I need more details," Carmen insisted. "Photos I haven't seen, stories Jules was too embarrassed to tell me." Jules picked up her phone. "We do have photos from the trip." Rowan watched as Jules navigated to their vacation album, scrolling through images they'd already reviewed multiple times together. She paused on a particular photo, thumb hovering over the screen. In it, they wore matching flannel shirts, a joke purchase from a kitschy tourist shop. Jules beamed at the camera while Rowan kissed her temple, eyes closed, utterly content. It was candid, affectionate, and completely unguarded. "Is it okay if I post this one?" Jules asked, hesitantly. The question caught Rowan off guard. Jules maintained a meticulously curated social media presence, professional, polished, and notably lacking any mention of their relationship so far. That she wanted to share this image, soft, intimate, undeniably romantic, felt significant. Understanding flickered between them. This wasn't just about a photo. It was Jules asking permission to make them public, official in the eyes of their wider circle. Rowan nodded, watching as Jules opened Instagram and began typing a caption. She angled the screen so Rowan could see. "Turns out my favorite rival makes a better partner." Jules' finger hovered over share, a tiny moment of hesitation. Rowan gently reached over, pressing her finger on top of Jules, completing the action together. "You two are so nauseatingly cute I might need insulin," Carmen declared, though her expression had softened considerably. Jules' phone immediately began buzzing with notifications. She laughed when a specific message appeared. Savi's texting, in all caps. "Apparently we owe her everything, and she knew it all along." "To be fair, they did have a betting pool about us," Rowan pointed out. More notifications flooded in, and Rowan was surprised by her lack of anxiety. She'd always been private about her relationships, protective of her personal boundaries, but watching people respond with joy to being included in their happiness felt unexpectedly satisfying. She found herself leaning into Jules, a quiet acknowledgement of this small milestone. "So, what's next for the former rivals?" Carmen asked, stealing the last piece of French toast. "Jules mentioned something about moving in together?" "My lease is up next month," Rowan explained. "We're still figuring out logistics." Jules nodded. "Mostly whether Rowan's book collection constitutes a fire hazard." "It's a carefully curated library." "It's literary hoarding." Carmen grinned. "Still bickering like an old married couple, I approve." After settling the bill, which turned into a three-way argument until Carmen finally won by physically removing Jules's credit card from her hand, they parted with promises of dinner the following weekend. Carmen hugged Rowan again, whispering, "She's happier than I've ever seen her," before bouncing off toward her car. They walked hand in hand through Jules' neighborhood, which Rowan now navigated without GPS. The area had become familiar over the past months. The bakery with the best sourdough, the dog park where Jules insisted on petting every available canine, the coffee shop where they'd had their first real date back in the city. The route now felt like part of her internal map, the beginning structure of a shared life. "So that wasn't so bad," Jules ventured. "Carmen interrogating you." "I survived." Rowan squeezed her hand. "She's exactly as advertised." "Wait until you meet her girlfriend. They're terrifying together." They fell into comfortable conversation about practical matters. Whether Rowan's desk would fit in the spare bedroom, which moving company to use, if Jules' closet organization system could accommodate Rowan's more minimalist wardrobe. The future unfolding in ordinary, beautiful increments. At a corner newsstand, Jules stopped suddenly. "Wait here." Rowan watched, bemused, as Jules darted toward the stand, purchasing something she deliberately kept hidden. She returned with a mischievous smile. "For later." Back at the apartment, Jules finally revealed her secret purchase, pressing it into Rowan's hand. A postcard. Not the tourist variety, but one of those artsy blank ones sold in independent bookstores. Except this one wasn't blank. The front showed a photo of them at Coral Haven caught mid-laugh near the ocean, clearly clipped from Sapphi's wedding album. Rowan turned it over to find Jules' neat handwriting on the back. The best thing I ever fake planned. She laughed, unexpectedly moved by the simple gesture. Rowan collected postcards from everywhere she'd traveled, a habit Jules had noted early in their fake relationship. That Jules remembered, that she'd thought to add this moment to Rowan's collection, felt deeply intimate. For your collection, Jules said, suddenly shy. I thought, since that's where our journey really started. Rowan pulled her close, pressing their foreheads together. Real was always better, she whispered against Jules's lips. Even the bickering? Jules murmured. Especially the bickering, Rowan confirmed, kissing her softly. It's how we communicate best. Jules smiled against her mouth. Is that what we're calling it now? Absolutely, very sophisticated linguistic theory. Nurse. Overachiever. Jules wrapped her arms around Rowan's neck. You're overachiever. My favorite rival, Rowan agreed, kissing her again, adding to the collection of real moments that had replaced all their pretending.
Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review.